Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Redfield, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. That's long enough to see every kind of trouble these mountains can throw at you. Wildfire, rock slides, lost hikers, and plenty of folks who think they're tougher than Mother Nature. But what happened to me up on Devil's Backbone in October of '73 changed everything I thought I knew about these hills. I grew up in coal country, down in the valleys where my daddy spent his whole life digging black rock out of the earth. He died when I was 12. Mine collapse took him and 6 other good men. That's when I decided I wanted to work above ground, where I could see the sky. The mountains called to me, but not the same way they called to my ancestors. See, my family's got Melungeon blood, going back generations. The old folks always told stories about things living in these mountains, spirits and devils and creatures made of stone. I never paid much attention to that talk. Figured it was just superstition, maybe meant to keep outsiders away from family hunting grounds. After all, I had real problems to deal with, preventing forest fires, rescuing hikers, keeping people safe from very real dangers. The Blue Ridge Parkway runs right through some of the most beautiful and dangerous country in Virginia. My section covers the Devil's Backbone, a ridge system that rises up to 4,200 feet. It's got everything that makes Appalachian wilderness deadly. Hidden caves, sudden drop-offs, weather that changes faster than you can blink. The Cherokee used to call something up there Nun Yunu, which the old-timers told me meant stone giant. I always figured that was just their way of describing the mountain itself. October in '73 started out normal enough. Early frost had come and gone, leaving the trees bare, except for a few stubborn oaks still holding their leaves. The morning fog would roll in thick as cotton, making it impossible to see more than 10 feet in any direction. Perfect weather for someone to get lost or hurt. That's when the call came in about the missing geological survey team. 4 researchers from Virginia Tech had been up studying limestone cave systems for the past week. They were supposed to check in every day by radio, but nobody had heard from them in 48 hours. Their last known position was near the old Cherokee burial caves, about 45 miles from the nearest road. Once you get back in there, radio doesn't work worth a damn. Too many valleys and ridges blocking the signal. I loaded up my Jeep with standard search and rescue gear, medical supplies, emergency flares, rope, and my backup radio. Threw in some explosive charges too, the kind we use for controlled burns. You never know when you might need to clear a rock slide or create a signal blast. The drive up took me 3 hours, following old logging roads that barely deserved the name. By the time I reached their base camp, the fog was so thick I had to use my headlights in the middle of the day. Their camp looked normal at first, tents still standing, equipment neatly arranged, no signs of struggle, but something felt wrong. It was too quiet. Not just people quiet, nature quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped moving through the trees. In 17 years of working these mountains, I'd never experienced silence like that. It made my skin crawl. That's when I found their survey equipment. The expensive instruments they'd been using to map the cave systems were scattered around a clearing about 50 yards from camp. But they weren't just broken. They were crushed, twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. Metal pieces that should have bent were shattered like glass. Heavy equipment that took 2 men to carry was compressed into chunks no bigger than my fist. I radioed for backup and helicopter support, then started following the trail toward the caves. The researchers had left clear marks. Orange survey flags tied to trees, equipment caches marked with reflective tape. Professional work. These weren't weekend hikers who'd gotten in over their heads. As I got closer to the cave entrance, the wrongness got stronger. Trees showed claw marks 15 feet up their trunks, too high for any bear, too wide for any animal I could think of. The ground felt different under my boots, softer somehow, like it might give way at any moment. My compass started acting strange too, needle spinning wildly instead of pointing north. When I tried the radio again, all I got was static, mixed with a sound I couldn't identify at first. It reminded me of something, but I couldn't place what. Then I realized what it sounded like. Stones grinding against each other, deep underground. The cave entrance was bigger than I'd expected. 20 feet wide and almost as tall, opening into the mountain like a giant mouth. Cherokee burial caves were supposed to be sacred places, and looking at this one, I could understand why. Something about the way it cut into the rock face seemed too perfect, too deliberate. Like it had been carved instead of formed by natural processes. My backup arrived just after noon. Jim Cassidy and Maria Santos, 2 rangers I'd worked with for years. Jim brought the search dogs, German shepherds trained to find people in wilderness conditions. Maria had the climbing gear we'd need if the researchers had gotten trapped in the cave system. Hell of a thing, Jim said, looking at the twisted survey equipment. He was part Cherokee himself, though he didn't talk about it much. My grandmother used to say this whole area was cursed. Said something lived in these caves that shouldn't be disturbed. Your grandmother also said coffee would stunt your growth, I told him. These folks probably had some kind of accident, maybe a rock slide. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. No rock slide would create the kind of damage we were seeing, and no rock slide would explain the footprints. Maria found them first, pressed into solid rock near the cave entrance. At first, I thought they were just natural depressions in the stone. But when I looked closer, they were clearly prints. Humanoid shape, but massive, 22 inches long and almost as wide. What really got my attention was the texture. The impressions weren't smooth like they'd been pressed by flesh and bone. They had a rough, granular quality, like they'd been made by something composed of stone itself. Could be fake, Maria suggested. Maybe someone's playing games, trying to create another Bigfoot hoax. I knelt down next to one of the prints and ran my fingers along the edge. The stone around it was displaced, pushed up and outward, like the print had been made by something incredibly heavy. But that was impossible. This wasn't soft earth or mud. This was limestone that had been solid for thousands of years. The dogs were acting strange too. Instead of picking up scent trails and getting excited like they usually did, they kept backing away from the cave entrance, whining and pulling at their leashes. Jim had to practically drag them forward to get them anywhere near the opening. Never seen them act like this, he said. It's like they're scared of something. We decided Maria would stay outside to maintain radio contact, while Jim and I went into the cave system. Standard procedure called for us to stay together, keep a safety line back to the entrance, and check in every 15 minutes. The cave went back further than our flashlights could reach. The walls were smooth limestone, formed by millions of years of water flow. Our voices echoed strangely, coming back to us distorted and delayed. About 100 feet in, we found the researchers' equipment caches, marked containers full of scientific instruments and mapping tools. Everything was undisturbed. If they made it this far, where are they? Jim asked. That's when we heard the grinding sound. It came from deep in the cave system, echoing off the walls until we couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. Like millstones working against each other, or massive gears turning without oil. The sound went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. Geological activity, I said. Maybe the limestone is shifting. Jim didn't answer. He was staring at something on the cave floor. Another footprint. This one fresh. The stone around it was still warm to the touch. We followed the prints deeper into the cave, our safety line stretching behind us. The tunnel branched off in several directions, but the prints kept following the main passage. After another 100 feet, the cave opened up into a massive chamber. Our flashlight beams couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. That's where we found the first body. Dr. Rebecca Chen, one of the researchers, was lying near the center of the chamber. At least, I think it was her. The condition of the remains made identification difficult. She looked like she'd been compressed, flattened somehow. Her bones were visible through torn clothing, but they weren't broken the way bones break in a fall or rock slide. They were ground down, crushed into fragments. Jim threw up. I don't blame him. In 17 years of search and rescue, I'd never seen anything like it. We need to get out of here, he said, wiping his mouth. Get the state police, the FBI, whoever handles this kind of thing. But I was already moving toward the body, trying to understand what could have done this. That's when I noticed the cave walls around the chamber. They were covered in marks, deep punctures in the limestone, arranged in geometric patterns, like something with massive stone fingers had been clawing at the walls. The grinding sound started again, closer this time. Our flashlight beams flickered and went dim, as if something was draining the batteries. In the near darkness, I could have sworn I saw something moving along the far wall of the chamber. Something large and gray that seemed to be part of the stone itself. "Thomas," Jim's voice was tight with fear. "We need to go, right now." He was right. We backed toward the tunnel entrance, keeping our lights trained on the chamber. The grinding sound followed us, echoing from multiple directions now. As we reached the safety line, I looked back one more time and saw something that made my blood freeze. The stone walls of the chamber were moving, shifting and rearranging themselves like they were alive. We ran for the entrance, following our safety line as fast as we could move in the darkness. Behind us, the grinding sound grew louder, accompanied now by something else, a roaring that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded like an avalanche, like tons of rock tumbling down a mountainside. We burst out of the cave into daylight that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness. Maria was waiting for us, but her face was pale with fear. "The radio," she said. "I was trying to call for backup, but listen to this." She held up her radio. Instead of static, we heard the same grinding, roaring sound we'd just escaped from in the cave. The sound was coming from underground, transmitted somehow through the radio waves. That's when we realized we weren't dealing with anything natural. We set up a perimeter around the cave entrance and called for backup, but the radios kept malfunctioning. Every time we tried to transmit, we got the same grinding, roaring sounds. It was like something was jamming our communications, but that was impossible. What kind of creature could interfere with radio signals? Jim had gone quiet after what we'd seen in the cave. He kept staring at the entrance, like he was waiting for something to come out. Finally, he told us what his grandmother had said about this place. She called it the Stone Walker. Said it was older than the Cherokee, older than any people who lived in these mountains. It only woke up when the earth moved. When there were tremors or earthquakes, it fed on the minerals in people's bones, incorporating them into its own body to make itself stronger. "That's folklore," I said. "Old stories meant to keep people away from dangerous places." But even as I said it, I was thinking about the compressed remains of Dr. Chen, about the impossible footprints pressed into solid stone, and I was remembering something else. There had been minor earthquake activity in the area over the past week. Small tremors, barely registering on seismographs, but enough to wake something that had been sleeping deep in the mountain. Maria volunteered to hike back to the vehicles and try to get help using the emergency radio. We agreed to stay in contact every 30 minutes using hand signals and mirror flashes. If she wasn't back by nightfall, Jim and I would come looking for her. While we waited, we explored the area around the cave entrance more thoroughly. What we found made the situation even stranger. The researchers' vehicles, 2 heavy-duty pickup trucks, were parked about a quarter-mile from the cave, but they'd been moved since I'd seen them earlier. Moved and arranged in a way that defied explanation. Both trucks had been flipped over and stacked on top of each other, like a child stacking toy blocks. The metal wasn't crushed or bent. It was compressed, folded in on itself with mathematical precision. Whatever had done, this possessed incredible strength, but more than that, it seemed to understand geometry, structure, engineering principles. "No bear did this," Jim said. "No natural force could arrange vehicles like this." He was right. And looking at the way the trucks were positioned, I realized they were arranged to form a barrier, blocking the most direct route back toward the main road. Something was trying to keep us here. That's when we heard Maria screaming. The sound came from the direction she'd gone, but it was distorted by the mountain acoustics until we couldn't tell exactly where she was. Her voice echoed off the cave walls and rock faces, creating multiple overlapping screams that seemed to come from everywhere at once. We ran toward the sound, following the trail she'd taken. After about 10 minutes of hard hiking, we found signs of struggle. Broken branches, torn clothing, but no blood. The trail led directly toward another cave entrance, one we hadn't noticed before. This one was smaller than the first, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Maria's screaming was coming from inside the cave, but it was getting fainter, distant, like she was being dragged deeper into the mountain. "We have to go after her," I said. Jim grabbed my arm. "Thomas, listen to me. My grandmother told me stories about people who went into these caves. They were never found. Or if they were found, they weren't people anymore. They'd been changed, made part of the mountain itself. That's just stories, Jim. Maria's real. She's in trouble right now. But as we approached the cave entrance, I started to understand what Jim meant. The opening was surrounded by stones arranged in defensive patterns. Not random rock falls, but deliberate placement. And some of those stones looked wrong. Too smooth, too curved. They looked almost like bones that had been transformed into limestone. Inside the cave, Maria's screaming stopped abruptly. We waited for 10 minutes, calling her name, but there was no response. The silence was complete except for the grinding sound, which was getting louder and more frequent. It seemed to be coming from multiple cave systems now, like whatever was down there was moving through underground tunnels that connected the whole mountain. That's when I decided to go back to my Jeep and get the explosive charges. "You're talking about bringing down the whole cave system," Jim said. "If Maria's alive down there, if Maria's alive, this might be the only way to get her out. And if she's not," I couldn't finish the sentence. "Look, whatever's in these caves, it's not natural. It's not something we can fight with standard equipment. Maybe we can trap it, or at least slow it down enough to get help." Jim helped me carry the charges back to the main cave entrance. We had 6 explosive packets, enough to bring down a significant section of tunnel if placed correctly. But as we approached the cave mouth, we realized the situation had changed again. The stone around the entrance was different. The walls had shifted, rearranged themselves into new patterns. The opening was smaller now, and the rocks around it were covered in fresh markings. The same geometric claw patterns we'd seen inside, but these were recent. Made while we were gone. Something was in there, actively changing the cave structure. And it knew we were outside. The grinding sound stopped. In the sudden silence, we could hear something moving in the darkness beyond the cave mouth. Something large, dragging itself across stone, with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. That's when we saw the eyes. 2 points of light deep in the cave, reflecting our flashlight beams. They were positioned about 12 feet off the ground, too high for any human, too far apart for any animal. As we watched, frozen with fear, the eyes moved closer to the entrance. Whatever was coming toward us was massive. The creature that emerged from the cave was like nothing in any biology textbook. 12 feet tall and roughly humanoid, but composed entirely of living limestone. Its body was a patchwork of different colored stones. Gray mountain limestone, white cave deposits, and darker stones that might once have been something else, something organic. It moved with surprising grace for something made of rock, flowing across the ground like water, but leaving deep impressions in solid stone with every step. Its arms were disproportionately long, ending in hands that looked more like geological formations than fingers, and its face was the worst part. It had features. Eyes, a mouth, something that might have been a nose. But they were all wrong, carved from stone by something that understood human anatomy, but had never been human itself. The eyes were chunks of quartz that caught and reflected light in unnatural ways. The mouth was a crack in the limestone that went too far back into its head, revealing deeper darkness inside. But it was the sounds it made that really got to me. Not roaring or growling like an animal, but that grinding noise we'd been hearing, the sound of its own stone body moving against itself. And underneath that, something else, voices. Human voices, muffled and distorted, as if people were trapped inside the creature's body, trying to speak. "None you knew we," Jim whispered. "The stone walker, it's real." The creature turned toward us at the sound of his voice, moving its massive head with deliberate precision. For a moment, I thought it was going to charge. Instead, it began to change the landscape around us. The ground beneath our feet started to shift and buckle. Rocks that had been part of the mountain for millennia began rearranging themselves, forming walls and barriers that cut off our escape routes. Within minutes, we were surrounded by a maze of stone barriers, each one perfectly positioned to prevent us from reaching our equipment or vehicles. It wasn't just strong, it was intelligent. It understood tactics, strategy, the art of cutting off an enemy's options. I pulled out one of the explosive charges and armed it. "Jim, when I throw this, run for the gap between those 2 rocks. Don't look back." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." That was a lie, and we both knew it. But it was the only chance either of us had. I threw the charge toward the creature's feet and dove for cover behind a boulder. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, filling the air with stone fragments and dust. For a moment, I thought it had worked. I couldn't see the creature through the debris cloud. Then I heard the grinding sound again, and I knew the explosive had barely slowed it down. When the dust cleared, the stonewalker was still there, but now I could see what the explosion had revealed. Its body wasn't just made of limestone, it was filled with organic material, bones, preserved by some unknown process and incorporated into its structure. Human bones. The missing geological team wasn't just dead, they had become part of this creature. And Maria. I could see her face, perfectly preserved but transformed into white cave stone, pressed into the creature's chest like a grotesque decoration. She was conscious, aware, trying to speak, but unable to make sound. The creature had been collecting people for who knows how long, incorporating them into itself, keeping them alive but transformed into living stone. It wasn't just killing, it was building itself into something larger and more powerful. That's when I understood what I had to do. I armed the remaining 5 explosive charges and started placing them around the cave entrance. Not to hurt the creature, but to bring down the entire cave system, trapping it underground where it belonged. It was the only way to prevent it from continuing to grow, continuing to claim victims. The stonewalker realized what I was doing and began moving toward me with terrible purpose. The ground bucked and heaved under its feet, creating new obstacles, trying to stop me from reaching the charges. But I had 17 years of experience moving through difficult terrain, and I was fighting for more than just my own life now. I was fighting for Maria, for the geological team, for everyone who might stumble across this thing in the future. I placed the last charge and started running for the perimeter I'd established. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase, its massive stone feet creating small earthquakes with every step. The sound was getting closer, and I knew I wasn't going to make it to safety before the charges detonated. But that was okay. I'd done what I came to do. The explosion was bigger than I'd expected. Not just the charges I'd placed, but something else. Stored energy in the cave system itself, released all at once. The entire mountain face came down in a controlled collapse, sealing the cave entrance under thousands of tons of rock. The last thing I saw before the shockwave knocked me unconscious was the stone walker, trapped between the cave entrance and the falling rocks, its quartz eyes reflecting the explosion like distant stars. I woke up in a hospital in Charlottesville 3 days later. Jim had found me buried under rubble, unconscious but alive, and somehow managed to get me down the mountain to where help could reach us. I had a concussion, several broken ribs, and cuts all over my body from stone fragments. But I was alive. Jim told the state investigators that we'd encountered an unstable cave system that had collapsed during our search and rescue operation. Maria Santos and the 4 geological researchers were officially listed as victims of a seismic event, their bodies presumed lost in the cave collapse. That was the official story, anyway. The real story is more complicated. 3 months after the incident, I started getting reports from other park rangers throughout the Blue Ridge system. Equipment found destroyed in ways that defied explanation. Hikers reporting strange sounds from underground. Seismic monitoring stations registering activity that didn't match any known geological patterns. I think the stonewalker wasn't unique. I think there are others, sleeping in cave systems throughout the Appalachian mountain chain, waiting for the right conditions to wake up. The Cherokee knew about them. That's why certain areas were considered sacred, forbidden to outsiders. I've started studying Cherokee language and customs, trying to understand what the old stories really meant. I've met with tribal historians who remember the warnings passed down through generations. They tell me the stonewalkers are guardians of the deep places, protectors of sacred burial sites. They only become dangerous when people disturb things that should be left alone. Maybe the geological team found something they shouldn't have touched. Maybe their research woke up something that had been sleeping for centuries. I don't work the Devil's Backbone section anymore. The Park Service reassigned me to lower elevation areas, officially because of my injuries. Unofficially, I think they know something they're not willing to admit publicly. The entire ridge system has been declared geologically unstable, closed to public access indefinitely. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I can still hear that grinding sound echoing across the mountains. Stone moving against stone, deep underground. And I know that what we buried up there isn't dead, it's just waiting. I can't go into enclosed spaces anymore without having panic attacks. Caves, buildings with low ceilings, even my own basement, they all remind me of being trapped underground with something that shouldn't exist. The doctors call it claustrophobia, a normal response to trauma. They don't understand that it's not just fear of small spaces, it's fear of what might be living in them. The Cherokee Nation has set up its own monitoring system in the area, working quietly with Park Service officials who are willing to listen. They know more about these things than any government agency, and they're the ones keeping watch now, making sure the old warnings are remembered and respected. If you're planning to explore cave systems in the Appalachian Mountains, especially during periods of seismic activity, I have some advice for you. Don't. Find another hobby. Take up bird watching or photography or anything that keeps you above ground and in the sunlight. Because some things are buried for a reason, and some places are meant to stay undisturbed. The mountains have been here for millions of years, and they have their own ways of protecting themselves. We're just visitors, and we do well to remember that. My name is Thomas Redfield, and I've told you the truth about what happened on Devil's Backbone. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. But if you ever find yourself hiking in remote mountain areas and you hear that grinding sound, that noise, like stones moving against each other deep underground, don't investigate. Just turn around and walk away. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. My name is Elizabeth Harrow, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 15 years. I've pulled lost hikers out of frozen creeks, found kids who wandered off trails, and carried injured climbers down rocky slopes more times than I can count. I know these mountains like my own backyard. Every trail, every creek, every abandoned cabin left over from the old days. I grew up here in eastern Tennessee. My daddy died in a mining accident when I was 12, and my Uncle Billy died in another cave-in 3 years later. The mountains take what they want, when they want it. That's just how it is around here. But they also give back if you know how to listen to them. The old-timers used to tell stories about the hollers, the deep valleys between the mountains where folks used to live back in the 1930 seconds. They'd talk about families who didn't make it through the worst winters, about hunger that drove people to do terrible things. I always figured those stories were just about the Great Depression, when people got desperate and ate whatever they could find. Sometimes that meant things you wouldn't normally eat, but I never believed the other stories, the ones about hunger that changed people into something else entirely. February 1981 was one of the worst winters we'd seen in 20 years. Ice storms knocked out power for weeks. Snow piled up so deep you couldn't see fence posts. The roads were blocked, and even our helicopters couldn't fly in that weather. That's when the Kowalski family went missing. Tom Kowalski had called our office the week before. He wanted to take his wife and 3 kids on what he called a winter adventure, hiking from cabin to cabin through the old homestead area near Cataract Falls. I tried to talk him out of it. February, in the mountains, isn't adventure time, it's survival time. But Tom had money and fancy gear, and he thought that meant he could handle anything. Rich folks from Atlanta always think that way. So I gave him the permits and made him promise to check in every day by radio. He checked in Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, nothing. Thursday, still nothing. Friday morning, I strapped on my snowshoes and headed out with my partner David McKenzie and 6 volunteers from the local search and rescue team. The wind was howling something fierce, and the snow was coming down so hard you could barely see 10 feet ahead. We found their first campsite by noon. Tom's expensive tent was still standing, but when we looked inside, something was wrong. Really wrong. There was blood everywhere, not just a little blood from a cut or nosebleed. Dark, dried blood splattered on the sleeping bags and tent walls. But all their gear was still there. Their food, their clothes, their expensive GPS devices, everything except the family. Maybe a bear got into their tent, said Billy Morrison, one of our volunteers. Billy's lived in these mountains his whole life, and he knows bear sign better than anybody. But David was looking at the blood patterns, and his face had gone pale. David's got medical training, and he's seen plenty of accidents over the years. This isn't bear damage, he said quietly. Something was eating in here, something that used its hands. I found the tracks about 20 feet from the tent. They were human footprints, but wrong somehow. Too long, with deep gouges in the snow like claws had scraped the ground. The tracks led toward an old homestead cabin about a mile up the holler. My radio crackled with static, and for a second I thought I heard voices, whispered words I couldn't understand. But when I tried to call our base station, all I got was more static. The forest was too quiet. In 15 years of mountain rescue, I'd learned to read the signs. When animals go silent, when even the wind seems to hold its breath, that means something's wrong. Really wrong. We need to follow those tracks, I told the team, but we stick together. Nobody wanders off for any reason. As we started hiking toward the cabin, I noticed something else that made my stomach twist. All the normal animal tracks you'd see in winter, rabbit, deer, even mice, they all led away from where we were going. Whatever had happened here, the animals wanted nothing to do with it. The cabin was older than dirt, built back in the 1932 when families tried to make a living in these remote hollers before the government turned it all into parkland. Most of them failed and moved away, but some died trying to make it through winters, just like this one. The front door was hanging open, banging in the wind. Fresh snow had blown inside, but underneath it we could see more blood. A lot more. "Jesus Christ," whispered Tom Jenkins, another volunteer. Tom's seen plenty of hunting accidents, but this shook him up bad. The cabin looked like a slaughterhouse. Blood on the walls, blood soaked into the old wooden floor, blood splattered across the rusty cook stove. But what made it worse was how organized it looked. Like someone had been preparing meat. David found pieces of clothing torn into strips and hung from the rafters, like you'd hang jerky to dry. The strips were frozen solid, and some of them had teeth marks chewed right through the fabric. "Where are the bodies?" asked Sarah Chen, our youngest volunteer. She was trying to keep her voice steady, but I could hear the fear creeping in. That was the question that kept bothering me too. With this much blood, there should have been bodies, or at least pieces of them. But except for the torn clothing, we couldn't find any human remains. I was examining the blood patterns when my GPS started acting up. The screen flickered, showing impossible coordinates that would have put us somewhere in the middle of Canada. Then it showed us underwater in the Atlantic Ocean. Finally, it just went black. "Anyone else having equipment problems?" I asked. Every GPS in our group was malfunctioning. Our radios picked up nothing but static, and sometimes those weird whispered voices in a language none of us recognized. Even our emergency beacon wasn't working right. That's when David found the bones. They were outside, behind the cabin, partially buried in the snow. At first I thought they might be from deer or maybe a large dog. But when David brushed the snow away, we could see they were human leg bones. Thigh bones, specifically. And they'd been gnawed. "Those are tooth marks," David said, his breath making white clouds in the cold air. "But look at the size of them. The bite marks were huge. Canine teeth that had left gouges nearly 4 inches long in the bone. No human has teeth that big. No animal in these mountains has teeth that big. Except maybe a bear. But bears don't eat people this way. They don't strip meat off bones this cleanly. We need to call this in," said Billy Morrison. "This is way beyond search and rescue." But our radios were still dead. And looking at the sky, I could tell another storm was coming in fast. We had maybe 2 hours before we'd have to find shelter or risk getting lost in a whiteout. That's when we heard the howling. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. It started low, almost like a person moaning, then rose to a shriek that echoed off the mountains and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound made your teeth ache and your stomach turn over. "Wolf?" asked Sarah, but her voice was shaking. "No wolves in these mountains," I said. "Haven't been for 50 years. The howling came again, closer this time. And underneath it, I swear I heard something else. A voice. Human words, but stretched out and twisted, like they were coming from a throat that wasn't shaped right anymore. "Help me," it said. "So hungry." Tom Jenkins grabbed his rifle. That's human speech. Someone's out there. But David caught his arm. "Don't. Something's not right about this." That's when we saw it moving between the trees. At first, it looked like a person walking through the deep snow. But it was moving too fast, taking steps that were too long. Even with snowshoes, nobody can move that quickly through snow that deep. And it was too tall, way too tall. There, Sarah pointed toward a gap between two big pine trees about 100 yards away. For just a second, we all saw it clearly. A human shape, but wrong, too thin, too stretched out, like someone had taken a normal person and pulled them apart. Its arms hung down almost to its knees. And even from that distance, we could see that its fingers were too long. Then it was gone, disappearing into the forest like it had never been there. "Did you all see that?" I asked. Everyone nodded, but nobody wanted to say what we'd actually seen, because saying it out loud would have meant admitting that something impossible was hunting in these mountains. The wind picked up, and the temperature dropped so fast I could feel it through my heavy winter coat. In 15 years of mountain rescue, I'd never felt cold like that. It was like someone had opened a door to a freezer the size of a house. "We need to get out of here," David said, "right now." But as we started packing up our gear, Tom Jenkins suddenly stopped and held up his hand for quiet. "Listen," he whispered. In the distance, we could hear voices calling for help. Multiple voices, echoing through the forest. They sounded like the Kowalski family. Tom's voice, his wife Linda, even their kids. "They're alive," said Billy Morrison, grabbing his pack. "We have to go help them." But something about those voices made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They were calling for help, but they all sounded exactly the same. Same tone, same desperate pitch, like someone was playing the same recording over and over. "Wait," I said. "Something's wrong with this." That's when the voices started calling our names. "Elizabeth," the voice called through the trees. It sounded exactly like Tom Kowalski, the missing hiker. "Elizabeth, help us. We're trapped." But Tom Kowalski didn't know my name. I'd talked to him on the phone when he got his permits, but we'd never met face to face. He wouldn't know my voice, and he sure wouldn't know to call out for me specifically. "That's not Tom," I told the team. Nobody answered those calls. But Billy Morrison was already walking toward the sound. "People are in trouble," he said. "That's what we're here for." "Billy, stop," David called out, but Billy kept walking into the trees. We heard him crashing through the snow for about 30 seconds. Then the forest went completely silent. No footsteps, no breaking branches, nothing. "Billy?" Sarah called out. "Billy, where are you?" A minute later, we heard Billy's voice calling back. "Over here, I found them. They're hurt bad." But Billy's voice was coming from a different direction now. And just like with the Kowalski family, there was something wrong with how it sounded. Too perfect, like someone reading lines from a script. "That's not Billy either," David whispered. "Billy's got a speech impediment. He can't say his R's right, but that voice is speaking perfectly." The fake Billy voice kept calling, "Elizabeth, David, come help, they need medical attention." Tom Jenkins raised his rifle and started scanning the tree line. What kind of sick game is this? That's when I understood what we were dealing with. My grandmother used to tell stories about creatures that could copy human voices to lure people away from safety. She called them by an old Native American word, Wendigo. I'd always thought those stories were just made-up warnings about staying close to home during bad weather. But standing in that frozen holler, listening to perfect imitations of voices from people who were probably already dead, I started to believe. "We're leaving," I announced. "Right now. We head back to the main trail and get out of these mountains." "What about Billy?" asked Sarah. "We can't just abandon him." "Billy's gone," David said quietly. "He'd figured it out too. Whatever took the Kowalski family got him." We started hiking back toward the main trail, but the voices followed us. First Billy calling for help, then Tom Kowalski, then Linda Kowalski and their kids. Always, from different directions, always trying to get us to split up and follow them into the trees. The worst part was how real they sounded. Perfect copies of human speech, full of pain and fear. If you didn't know better, you'd do anything to help those people. After about an hour of hiking, we stopped to rest and check our equipment. That's when Tom Jenkins noticed something that made us all go cold. "Where's Sarah?" he asked. We looked around. Sarah Chen was gone. We'd been so focused on the voices and staying together that nobody had noticed when she disappeared. "Sarah," I called out. "Sarah, where are you?" No answer, just the wind in the trees and the crunch of snow under our feet. Then we heard her voice. "Help me. It's got me. It's dragging me toward the old mine." The mine. I knew where that was. About half a mile up the ridge, there was an abandoned coal mine from the 1920s. The state had sealed it years ago, but local kids sometimes broke the barriers to explore. "We have to help her," said Tom Jenkins. "No," I said, "that's not Sarah. Sarah would never go near that mine. She's claustrophobic. She told me that when she first volunteered." But Tom was already hiking toward the sound of Sarah's voice. "I don't care what you think you know. I'm not leaving a teammate behind." David tried to stop him, but Tom pushed past and disappeared into a thick grove of mountain laurel. We heard him crashing through the undergrowth for a few seconds. Then nothing. Now we were down to 3 people. Me, David, and Pete Williams, our oldest volunteer. Pete had been doing mountain rescue since before I was born, and he looked scared for the first time since I'd known him. "This is wrong," Pete said. 40 years I've been in these mountains, and I've never seen anything like this." That's when we heard all of them calling at once. Billy, Sarah, Tom Jenkins, and the entire Kowalski family. 7 voices, all crying for help. All coming from different directions around us. And they were getting closer. "The mine," David said. "All the voices are trying to drive us toward that mine. Whatever this thing is, that's where it wants us to go." I looked at our remaining gear. We had 1 emergency flare gun, some basic camping supplies, and Pete's hunting rifle. Not much to fight something that could perfectly imitate human voices and move through deep snow like it was walking on pavement. The temperature was still dropping. My breath was freezing in my beard, and I could feel the cold creeping through my heavy winter clothes. But it wasn't normal cold. It was the kind of cold that comes from something that should never have existed in the first place. "We need fire," I said, "and we need shelter, but not here." That's when we heard the first real voice we'd heard in hours. Sarah Chen, screaming in genuine terror from somewhere up near the mine. This time, it didn't sound like an imitation. It sounded like someone dying. Against everything my experience told me, we headed toward the mine. Not because I believed we could save Sarah. Deep down, I knew she was already gone. But because running away wasn't working. Whatever was hunting us could move faster than we could, and it was herding us like sheep toward wherever it wanted us to go. Better to face it on our terms than get picked off one by one. The old mine entrance was built into the side of the ridge, with a heavy steel gate that was supposed to keep people out. But the gate was torn open like it was made of paper. Metal bars thick as my wrist were bent and twisted apart. "What kind of strength does that take?" Pete whispered. Inside the mine, we could see drag marks in the dirt. Multiple sets, like several people had been pulled down into the darkness. Some of the marks were old, maybe weeks or months. Others looked fresh. We followed the tracks with our flashlights, and about 50 feet into the mine, we found them. Billy Morrison was hanging from the ceiling by his arms, frozen solid. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, and his mouth was locked in a scream. But the worst part was his legs. Something had been eating them, cutting away pieces of meat and muscle like you'd carve a ham. Sarah Chen was propped against the wall like a doll. She was still alive, barely, but something had chewed through her left arm down to the bone. She looked at us with eyes that had seen too much. "It's so hungry," she whispered. "It's always hungry. It can't stop." Tom Jenkins was in the deepest part of the mine, tied up with what looked like wire. He was alive, but barely conscious. Both his hands were missing, cut off at the wrists. And the Kowalski family. I don't want to describe what we found. Just know that the thing had been feeding on them slowly, keeping them alive to preserve the meat. "Jesus Christ," Pete said. "What kind of animal does this?" That's when it answered him. "Not animal," it said in a voice like grinding stones. "Hungry, so hungry. The thing that stepped into the light of our flashlights used to be human." You could still see the basic shape, head, arms, legs, body. But everything was wrong, stretched out and twisted. It stood nearly 9 feet tall, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its skin was gray-white like old snow, stretched tight over bones that jutted out at impossible angles. But the worst part was its face. It still looked human, but starving. Sunken cheeks, hollow eyes, and a mouth full of yellowed teeth that were way too big for any human jaw. "Hungry since 1934, it said, and I realized it was talking about the year. So hungry. Ate my family first, then the neighbors, then anyone who came to the holler. The creature had been the original homesteader, the one who'd tried to make it through the terrible winter of 1934. When the food ran out, he'd started eating his family. And somehow, that hunger and cannibalism had changed him into something that could never die and never be satisfied. Every winter, new food comes to the mountains, it continued. Hikers, campers, rescue teams. Pete raised his rifle and fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets hit the creature and knocked it backward, but it just stood up and smiled. "Can't kill hunger," it said. "Hunger never dies." That's when I remembered my grandmother's stories. She'd said that Wendigos couldn't cross fire. They were creatures of winter and starvation, and fire was the opposite of everything they were. I pulled out our emergency flare gun and fired it at the ground between us and the creature. The flare exploded in a burst of red light and flame, and the Wendigo jerked backward like I'd hit it with electricity. "Fire!" I yelled. "It can't cross fire." David grabbed our camping supplies and started building a barrier of burning debris while I loaded another flare. The creature paced back and forth, staying just outside the circle of flame, watching us with eyes that reflected the firelight like an animal's. But we only had 3 flares left, and I could see that the barrier wouldn't hold for long. "The entrance," David said. "We can make it if we run now." Pete was helping Sarah walk, and I was supporting Tom Jenkins. We started backing toward the mine entrance, keeping the fire between us and the Wendigo. That's when it started speaking in our own voices. "Elizabeth," it said in my own voice, "you can't save them all. You never could." "David," it said in David's voice, "remember what happened to your great-grandfather in these mountains." David went white. "How could it know that?" "Know everything," the Wendigo said. "Know all the hunger in these mountains. Your great-grandfather starved here in 1934. Ate tree bark and leather before he died hungry." The creature was getting stronger, feeding off our fear and desperation. With each word it spoke, it seemed to grow larger. We made it to the mine entrance just as our fire barrier collapsed. The Wendigo rushed after us, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. David turned and emptied Pete's rifle into the creature, but it barely slowed down. In desperation, I fired my last 2 flares directly at its chest. The flares hit and exploded, setting the Wendigo on fire. It screamed, a sound like metal tearing, and fell backward into the mine. But not before it caught David. The creature's claws raked across David's chest and threw him against the stone wall of the mine entrance. He hit hard and slumped to the ground, not moving. I ran to him, but I could tell from the way he was lying that his neck was broken. David Mackenzie, who'd worked beside me for 8 years, who'd helped save dozens of people in these mountains, was dead. The Wendigo was still screaming inside the mine, but the screams were getting fainter. Maybe the fire had actually heard it, or maybe it was just retreating deeper into the mountain to wait for its burns to heal. Either way, we had to get out of there. Pete and I managed to get Tom Jenkins and Sarah Chen back to the main trail, but it took us almost 6 hours hiking through snow that kept getting deeper. By the time we reached the road, both of them were unconscious from blood loss and hypothermia. Sarah died in the helicopter on the way to the hospital. Tom lived, but he lost both hands and never spoke about what happened in that mine. The doctors said the trauma had affected his memory. The official report blamed everything on an avalanche. 6 people dead, 2 seriously injured, all because of unexpected geological instability in the old mine area. The state sealed the mine with concrete and put up warning signs, but they didn't mention anything about staying away during winter months specifically. I lost 3 fingers to frostbite and spent 2 weeks in the hospital. When I got out, I requested a transfer to a park in southern Tennessee where it doesn't snow much, but I still research those mountains. And every winter, when the snow gets deep and the temperature drops, I check the missing person reports. There are always more. Last winter, a family of 4 disappeared near Cataract Falls. The winter before that, 2 college students. Always during the coldest months, always in the same general area. The thing is still there. Still hungry. I've learned more about Wendigos since 1981. The old stories say they're created when someone resorts to cannibalism during extreme starvation, especially in winter. The act changes them, makes them crave human flesh forever, and gives them supernatural abilities to hunt and kill. They can live for decades, maybe centuries. They can mimic human voices perfectly. They can move through snow and cold like it doesn't affect them. And they can never be satisfied, no matter how much they eat. What scares me most is thinking about how many other places like that might exist. Remote areas where someone got desperate enough to cross that line. Where hunger turned into something that won't ever die. I carry different equipment now when I go into the mountains. Emergency flares, always. A lighter and fire-starting materials. Salt, because some of the old stories say Wendigos can't cross salt lines. And I never go into the deep hollers during winter. Never. Because I learned something in that mine that's kept me awake for 40 years. Hunger is more than just wanting food. Real hunger, the kind that drives you to eat things you shouldn't eat, changes you in ways you can't come back from. The Wendigo in that mine used to be a man with a family. Probably a good man who loved his wife and kids. But when winter came and the food ran out, he made a choice. And that choice made him into something that will hunt in those mountains forever. Every winter, when I see news reports about missing hikers or campers who disappeared in remote mountain areas, I wonder if they just got lost and died of exposure, like the reports always say. Or if they found something that's been hungry for a very long time. My name is Elizabeth Harrow. I was a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 15 years. And I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand something important. The mountains are beautiful, but they're not safe. Especially in winter. Especially when you're hungry and desperate and there's nothing around for miles except snow and trees and the sound of wind through empty cabins where people used to live. Because sometimes, when you're hungry enough, you might find out what other people did to survive. My name is William Blackstone, and I've been a park ranger for 22 years. Most of that time, I've worked the abandoned coal mine regions of Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. People think being a ranger means dealing with lost hikers and campfires, but my real job is mine safety and underground rescue. I know these old tunnels better than anyone alive. I'm 49 now, and I've seen plenty of things underground that would make most folks nervous. Cave-ins, gas leaks, flooded shafts. But I always had an explanation for everything. That scratching in the walls? Just rats. Those weird echoes? Sound bounces funny in tunnels. The old-timers would tell stories about things living deep in the mines, but I figured that was just talk from men who spent too much time breathing coal dust. I should mention why I got into this work. My brother Danny died in a mine collapse when I was 27. I was working the same mine, just different shift. Found his body 3 days later, crushed under a beam. After that, I couldn't go back to mining. But I couldn't leave the mines alone either. So I became the guy who goes in when things go wrong. November 1987 was colder than usual. The old Blackrock mine had been shut down since 1963 after a disaster that killed 47 miners. The main shaft went down over 800 feet, with tunnels stretching more than 200 miles through the mountains. Most of it was flooded now, and what wasn't flooded was full of methane gas that could kill you or blow you up. That's where I got the call about the missing urban explorers. 5 college kids from Virginia Tech had come up to document the old mine for some history project. Smart kids, apparently. They had permits, proper equipment, even filed a plan with the local sheriff, but they were 3 days overdue, and their families were getting scared. I wasn't too worried at first. Kids get lost in those tunnels all the time. The mine maps from the 60s aren't complete, and there are passages that don't show up anywhere. Plus, if you don't know what you're doing underground, it's easy to get turned around. I figured we'd find them sitting somewhere, maybe with a broken ankle or dead flashlight. I called up my usual rescue team. Carl Morrison had been doing mine rescue almost as long as me. Good man, steady hands, never panicked. Diana Fitzgerald was newer, but she was small enough to get through tight spaces and smart about safety protocols. Both of them had pulled people out of bad situations before. We met at the main entrance to Blackrock Mine at dawn. The entrance was just a big hole in the hillside, surrounded by rusty warning signs and a chain-link fence that didn't keep anybody out. The air coming up from underground smelled wrong, too sweet, with a chemical tang that made my nose burn. "Air quality's off," Diana said, checking her meter. "Getting some weird readings here." I looked at my own equipment. The methane detector was jumping around like it couldn't make up its mind. That was unusual, but old mines do strange things to instruments sometimes. "We'll test every 100 feet as we go down," I told them. "First sign of trouble, we're out." The entrance tunnel sloped down into darkness. Our headlamps cut through the black, showing wooden support beams that were older than me. Some of them sagged under the weight of the mountain above us. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, and our boots splashed through puddles that reflected our lights like black mirrors. About 50 feet in, Carl stopped. "You hear that?" We all listened. There was a sound coming from deeper in the mine, like scratching, slow, deliberate scratching, like something with claws was carving lines in stone. "Probably just settling," I said, but my voice sounded hollow in the tunnel. These old mines make all kinds of noise. Diana found the first piece of equipment 20 feet further in, a expensive-looking video camera smashed to pieces. But here's what bothered me. It wasn't just broken. It looked like something had torn it apart from the inside out, pulling the metal housing in directions it wasn't supposed to bend. "Kids probably dropped it," Carl said, but he didn't sound convinced. We kept going, following the main tunnel as it curved deeper into the mountain. The scratching sound stayed with us, always just ahead, always just out of sight. Our lights started acting funny too. They would dim for no reason, then brighten again, like something was playing with the power. That's when we found where the kids had set up camp. Their gear was arranged in a perfect circle, in a wide chamber, about 200 feet down. Sleeping bags, backpacks, food, all laid out with mathematical precision. But no kids, and no signs of struggle. It looked like they had just vanished in the middle of setting up. "This doesn't make sense," Diana whispered. "People don't just disappear." But looking at that empty circle of gear, with our lights flickering, and that scratching sound echoing from the darkness beyond, I was starting to think that maybe they could. We searched the immediate area around the camp, calling out names and listening for responses. The mine swallowed our voices and gave back nothing but echoes that seemed to last too long. Diana found something that made my skin crawl, scratches carved deep into the coal wall, forming patterns that looked almost like writing. The marks were fresh, cutting through decades of coal dust to show bright black stone underneath. "No human tool made these," Carl said, running his fingers along the grooves. "Look how deep they go. And the pattern, it's too regular." I had to agree. The scratches went 6 inches into solid coal, carved in long, sweeping curves that formed shapes I didn't recognize. Whatever made them had to be incredibly strong, stronger than any mining equipment I knew. We decided to split up to cover more ground. I know that sounds stupid now, but at the time it seemed reasonable. The main tunnel continued straight ahead, and there were 2 smaller passages branching off to the left and right. Carl took the left passage, Diana took the right, and I continued down the main tunnel. We each had radio contact and agreed to check in every 10 minutes. The main tunnel kept going down, deeper than I'd ever been in Blackrock Mine. According to my map, this section should have been flooded, but the water level was much lower than expected. The air got thicker as I descended, and my headlamp beams seemed to bend and twist in ways that hurt my eyes. That's when I started noticing the absence. In any normal mine, especially one that's been abandoned for 24 years, you expect to see rats, lots of them. Mines are perfect for rodents, dark, quiet, plenty of places to nest. But I hadn't seen a single rat, or any sign that rats had ever been here. No droppings, no nests, no tiny bones, nothing. Even worse, there were no insects, no spiders, no beetles, nothing. The mine was completely lifeless except for us. My radio crackled. Diana's voice came through, distorted and strange. "William, you need to see this. I found, God, I don't know what I found. Talk to me, Diana." "What's your location?" "About 300 feet down the right passage. There's a chamber here that's not on any map. And William, there are bones in the walls." I changed direction immediately, following the right passage toward Diana's location. The tunnel was narrow, just wide enough for one person, and the walls seemed to press in as I moved. The scratching sound was louder here, more urgent, like whatever was making it knew we were getting close. I found Diana standing in a natural chamber about the size of a small room. Her light was pointed at the far wall, and when I saw what she was looking at, my legs almost gave out. Human bones were embedded in the coal wall like fossils, not buried or placed there, actually growing out of the rock as if they had been pushed through solid stone, and then the coal had reformed around them. I could see ribs, parts of skulls, finger bones, all jutting out at impossible angles. "This can't be real," I whispered, but my light confirmed what Diana's had shown me. The bones were definitely human, and they were definitely inside solid coal that showed no signs of being cut or disturbed. "There's more," Diana said, her voice shaking. "Look at this." She led me to another section of the wall, where a complete skeleton was embedded chest-deep in the stone. The skull was turned toward us, jaw open in what might have been a scream. But the most horrible thing was that the bones looked fresh. No decay, no yellowing with age. They could have been put there yesterday. My radio crackled again. Carl's voice panicked. "William, Diana, something's wrong over here. The tunnel's moving." "Carl, repeat that. What do you mean moving?" "The walls are shifting. It's like they're alive. I can see. Oh Jesus, there's something coming through the rock." The transmission cut to static. Diana and I looked at each other. We both knew Carl wasn't the type to panic over nothing. If he said something was wrong, something was very wrong. "We need to get to him," Diana said. But as we turned to leave the bone chamber, our lights revealed something that stopped us cold. The tunnel we had entered through was gone. The walls had somehow closed up, leaving us in a sealed chamber with no way out. I ran my hands over the wall where the tunnel opening had been. Solid coal, worn smooth, as if it had been that way for decades. But I absolutely knew, that there had been an opening there 5 minutes ago. "This is impossible," Diana said, but her voice was small and scared. "Rock doesn't just move like that." That's when we heard the scratching again, coming from inside the walls around us. Not from somewhere else in the mine, but from right inside the coal and stone that surrounded us. The sound was louder now, more urgent, and it seemed to be coming from every direction at once. And then, in the beam of my headlamp, I saw part of the wall begin to ripple like water. Something was coming through. The wall bulged outward like thick mud, coal dust falling away as something pushed through from the other side. Diana grabbed my arm, and we backed away until we hit the opposite wall. There was nowhere to run. A pale hand emerged from the stone, fingers too long and joints that bent the wrong way. Then an arm, impossibly thin, stretching out toward us. The creature that followed was barely human, tall, skeletal, with skin the color of old bone. Its face was wrong, stretched and hollow, with black holes where eyes should have been. But the worst part was how it moved through solid rock like it was walking through water. The coal parted around its body, flowing back together after it passed through. This thing could phase through solid matter. "Run!" I shouted, even though there was nowhere to go. The creature turned its head toward us, with a sound like grinding stone. When it opened its mouth, I could see rows of sharp, crystal teeth that looked like they were made of compressed coal. It made a noise, not quite a roar, not quite a scream, that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Then, the impossible happened. A new tunnel opened up behind us, the wall simply melting away to reveal a passage I knew hadn't existed seconds before. The creature was reshaping the mine around us. We ran. The tunnel twisted and curved in directions that made no sense. Sometimes we were running uphill, sometimes down, sometimes the floor sloped so steeply I thought we might fall into darkness. Behind us, that grinding, scratching sound followed, along with something worse, the sound of rock flowing like liquid. "Diana," I gasped as we ran. "The thing can control the mine. It's changing the tunnels." "That's impossible." But even as she said it, the wall to our left rippled, and another pale hand reached out, swiping at us with claws that sparkled like black diamonds. We dodged and kept running. My radio crackled with static, then Carl's voice came through, terrified and broken. "William, if you can hear this, don't come looking for me. It's got me. The thing in the walls, it's got me." The transmission dissolved into screaming, then silence. We ran faster. The tunnel ahead split into 3 directions, none of which appeared on any map I'd ever seen. I chose the middle path because it seemed to slope upward, toward the surface. But after 50 feet, it curved back down, and I realized we were being herded. The creature wanted us to go in a specific direction. "William," Diana panted, "my air meter's going crazy. It's detecting something toxic in the atmosphere." I checked my own instruments. She was right. The air was becoming poisonous, thick with chemicals that burned our lungs and made our eyes water. But we couldn't stop running because the scratching sound was getting closer. The tunnel opened into another chamber. This one much larger. Our lights revealed something that made my stomach turn. Carl was there, but not the way we hoped to find him. He was embedded in the far wall, sunk into the coal up to his chest. His eyes were open, and he was breathing, but his skin had taken on a gray, dusty appearance, like he was turning into stone. When he saw us, he tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. "Can't move," he gasped. "It's feeding, taking something from inside me." I ran to him and tried to pull him free, but it was like trying to pull someone out of concrete. The coal around his body was solid, fused to his skin. Worse, I could feel that he was cold. Not just cold, freezing, like his body heat was being drained away. "What does it want?" Diana asked, keeping her light trained on the tunnel openings around us. Carl's voice was getting weaker. "Minerals. It feeds on minerals and bones, changes people into part of the mine." That's when I understood. The bones in the walls weren't just embedded in the coal, they were being absorbed by it. The creature was slowly turning its victims into part of the mine structure itself. And now it had Carl. A sound echoed from the tunnel behind us. Footsteps, but not human footsteps. These were too heavy, too rhythmic, like hammer blows against stone. The creature was coming, and this time it wasn't trying to hide. "We have to leave him," Diana said, and I could hear the horror in her voice. "We can't help him." "I'm not leaving Carl. William, look at him. He's already gone." She was right, and I hated her for it. Carl's skin was getting grayer by the minute, and I could see veins of black starting to spread up his neck like cracks in pavement. The creature was transforming him into something that wasn't human anymore. Carl's eyes focused on me one last time. "Don't let it get out," he whispered. "Seal the mine. Don't let it reach the surface." The footsteps were getting closer. I made a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. We ran. The tunnel system had changed again while we'd been in the chamber. Passages that had been there before were gone, replaced by new ones that led deeper into the mountain. I was starting to understand that the creature controlled every aspect of this underground world. It was like being inside the belly of some huge, intelligent beast. "There," Diana pointed ahead. "I can feel air movement. That has to lead outside." We followed the air current through a narrow passage that forced us to crawl on hands and knees. The scratching sound followed us, sometimes from above, sometimes from below, always just close enough to remind us we were being hunted. The passage opened into a shaft that went straight up. Looking up, I could see a tiny circle of gray light. The surface, maybe 200 feet above us, but there were no ladders, no way to climb up. "We're trapped," Diana said. That's when the walls around the shaft began to move. The creature was coming through the stone itself, its pale form visible just beneath the surface of the coal. And this time, there was nowhere to run. The creature emerged from the wall directly in front of us, but this time it didn't phase through completely. Instead, it stayed partially embedded in the coal, as if the rock itself was part of its body. I could see now that its skin wasn't just pale, it was actually made of the same material as the coal walls, a living fusion of flesh and stone. "You have disturbed the deep places," it said, and its voice sounded like grinding millstones. "Your kind digs too deep, awakens what should sleep." Diana raised her equipment, trying to use her radio to call for help. But the creature gestured with one elongated hand, and the devices simply crumbled to dust. The metal and plastic components separated and fell away, leaving nothing but scattered particles. "The miners in 1963, I said, putting pieces together. "The disaster that killed 47 people. That was you." The creature's head tilted, and I could see intelligence in those black eye sockets. Ancient intelligence. They broke through into my domain, disturbed the deep stone. I defended what is mine. And now you're doing it again. Your young explorers came seeking old secrets. Now they are part of the eternal structure. As you will be. That's when Diana did something brave and stupid. She pulled out an emergency flare and lit it, filling the chamber with red light. The creature recoiled, its form wavering like heat distortion. "The mineral composition," she shouted to me. "It doesn't like the chemical reaction." I understood immediately. The creature was some kind of geological entity, something that lived in coal and stone. Chemical reactions, fire, explosions, could hurt it. I still had my emergency kit, including small charges used for clearing debris in mine rescues. Not much explosive power, but enough to bring down a tunnel if placed correctly. "Diana, can you keep it distracted?" She lit another flare, and the creature pulled back further, its form becoming less solid. I can try. I worked quickly, placing charges at strategic points around the chamber. The creature was ancient, but it wasn't stupid. It realized what I was doing and began moving toward me, flowing through the rock like liquid shadow. "The bones in the walls," I said as I worked. "Those are the miners from 1963, aren't they? And the college kids? They serve a greater purpose now. Part of the living mountain. As you will serve." The creature reached for me, and where its fingers touched my jacket, the fabric began turning gray and hard, like it was becoming stone. I could feel cold spreading up my arm, a numbing cold that went deeper than skin. Diana threw her lit flare directly at the creature's head. It hit and stuck, and the thing let out a shriek that shook dust from the ceiling. Its grip on me loosened, and I pulled away, leaving part of my jacket sleeve behind, now transformed into coal. I finished placing the charges. "Diana, we need to get up that shaft." "How? It's 200 feet straight up." The creature was recovering, pulling the flare from its head and crushing it. Its attention focused on Diana, and I watched in horror as she began backing away. But there was nowhere to go except up. "The walls," I said. "If it can phase through them, maybe we can too." It was insane. But Diana understood immediately. The creature's abilities seemed to affect the physical properties of the rock around it. Maybe, just maybe, we could use that. Diana grabbed my hand, just as the creature lunged for her. At the same moment, I triggered the explosives. The chamber erupted in fire and falling stone. The creature's shriek became a roar of pain and rage that seemed to come from the mountain itself. And in that moment of chaos, with the rock around us destabilized by the explosion, Diana and I found ourselves falling upward through stone that had become as insubstantial as smoke. We shot up through the shaft like we'd been fired from a cannon, the stone walls flowing around us like water. I could feel the creature's presence below, wounded and furious, trying to solidify the rock and trap us. But the explosion had disrupted its control, and we kept rising. We emerged from the mine entrance at full speed, tumbling onto the ground outside in a shower of coal dust and debris. Behind us, the mine shaft collapsed completely, tons of rock and earth falling inward to seal whatever lived in the depths below. Diana and I lay gasping in the November air, looking back at what had been the entrance to Black Rock Mine. Now it was just a depression in the hillside, filled with rubble and broken stone. "Is it over?" Diana asked. I looked at my hands. Where the creature had touched me, my skin was still gray and cold. I could feel something changing inside me, a hollowness that hadn't been there before. The thing had started the process of transformation, and I didn't think it was going to stop just because the mine was sealed. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I hope so." But deep underground, I could swear I still heard scratching. The official report said it was a gas explosion. Methane buildup in the abandoned mine had reached critical levels, and when the missing college students lit a campfire in an unauthorized area, the resulting explosion brought down most of the tunnel system. 5 young people lost their lives, and mine rescue specialist Carl Morrison was killed in the subsequent rescue attempt. That was the story that went into the files. Park Ranger William Blackstone and emergency response technician Diana Fitzgerald were treated for smoke inhalation and minor injuries. The Black Rock mine site was permanently sealed and declared an environmental hazard zone. Case closed. But that's not what really happened, and the people who matter know it. Diana lasted 3 weeks before the changes became too obvious to ignore. The gray patches on her skin spread slowly but steadily. Her body temperature dropped degree by degree until she had to wear heavy coats even indoors. The doctors couldn't explain it. They called it a rare mineral deficiency disorder and prescribed supplements that didn't help at all. She disappeared on a Tuesday morning in December. Left no note, didn't tell anyone where she was going. But I knew. The creature had marked her just like it marked me, and something deep in the earth was calling her back. I found her car parked at a rest area about 20 miles from Black Rock Mine. No sign of Diana herself, but there were fresh tunnels in the hillside nearby. Small tunnels, just big enough for one person, leading down into darkness. I didn't follow them. My own condition has stabilized, mostly. The gray patches on my hands and arms stopped spreading after about a month, but they never went away. My body temperature runs about 4 degrees below normal now, and I can't seem to get warm no matter how much I dress. Worse, I've developed an sensitivity to certain minerals. Iron makes me sick, copper burns my skin. Sometimes I catch myself staring at stone walls, wondering what it would feel like to sink into them and become part of something larger. I can't work underground anymore. The claustrophobia hits me as soon as I'm more than 50 feet below the surface. But I've found other ways to be useful. I've become something of an expert on mining disasters, particularly the kind that don't make sense according to conventional geology. There have been 17 similar incidents in the Appalachian coal region since 1920. Mines that collapsed without warning, workers who vanished without a trace, rescue teams that went down and never came back up. The pattern is always the same: deep excavation, unexplained geological instability, and then total closure of the site. I think we've been waking things up, things that were sleeping in the deep places long before humans learned to dig. The other rangers avoid me now. They say I'm obsessed, that the mine incident broke something in my head. Maybe they're right, but when I get reports of strange sounds from abandoned mining sites, or when excavation crews hit unexpected voids in areas that should be solid rock, I pay attention. Last week, a construction company in Kentucky broke through into a natural cave system while digging foundations for a new shopping mall. 3 workers went down to investigate and never came back up. The company sealed the opening with concrete and moved the construction site half a mile away. They told the local authorities it was due to unstable soil conditions. But the foreman called me privately. He'd heard about my expertise with unusual mining incidents. He wanted to know if I'd seen anything like what they found down there: scratch marks in solid limestone, arranged in patterns that looked almost like writing. And bones, lots of bones, embedded in the cave walls like they'd been pressed into soft clay. I told him to stay away from that site, told him to make sure it stayed sealed. Then I added Kentucky to my list of places to monitor. People think the earth is solid, predictable, safe. They think we understand what's down there in the deep places. But I know better now. I know that some things are older than human civilization, older than the coal and oil we dig up, older than the mountains themselves. And I know that every time we go deeper, every time we break through into spaces that have been dark and quiet for millions of years, we risk waking something that should stay asleep. My name is William Blackstone, and I used to be a mine rescue specialist. Now I'm something different. I'm a watcher, a keeper of secrets that most people wouldn't believe. And I'm here to tell you that if you ever find yourself near an abandoned mine, especially if you hear scratching sounds coming from underground, you should turn around and walk away. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And some things that live in the deep places are always hungry. My name is Catherine Ravenwood, and I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 14 years now. I used to be an elementary school teacher before this job, which is probably why they put me in charge of family programs and youth safety. I thought I'd seen everything when it came to kids getting lost in the woods. I was wrong. Before I tell you what happened that April, you need to know something about me. I've always been the practical type. When other rangers would whisper about wild children spotted in the deep woods, I'd roll my eyes. Those stories were always about some feral cats, or maybe kids whose parents weren't watching them close enough. Nothing more than that. I specialize in keeping families safe out here. I've got certificates in child psychology, wilderness first aid for kids, and I've run over 300 family camping programs. I know how children think, how they act when they're scared, and how far they can wander before they get into real trouble. At least, I thought I did. It was April 15th, 1976, when everything changed. We'd had heavy rains that spring, the kind that wash away old trail markers and expose parts of the mountain that haven't seen sunlight in decades. That's when Girl Scout Troop 247 went missing. 8 girls, ages 10 to 12, plus 2 adult leaders. They were supposed to be on a simple overnight camping trip in the Massanutten Mountain area. These weren't beginners either. Troop 247 had been camping with us for 3 years running. The leaders, Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen, knew these trails like their own backyards. When they didn't check in at the ranger station Sunday morning like planned, I figured they'd just gotten a late start breaking camp. But by noon, I started to worry. By 2 o'clock, I was driving out to their campsite with a knot in my stomach. The drive took me deeper into the mountains than most families ever go. Past the maintained trails, past the wooden signs and safety railings, into a part of Shenandoah that still feels wild. The road turned to dirt, then to barely, their tracks between the trees. Rain had washed out sections of the path, leaving deep muddy ruts that grabbed at my truck's tires. When I finally reached their planned camping spot, my heart sank. The area was completely empty. No tents, no people, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But something felt wrong beyond just the missing campers. The woods were too quiet. I've spent 14 years in these mountains, and I know what they sound like. There should have been bird calls, rustling leaves, maybe a squirrel chattering somewhere in the trees. Instead, there was this heavy silence that seemed to press down on everything like a thick blanket. Even the wind had stopped. I got out of my truck and started looking around. The ground was soft from all the rain, perfect for holding footprints. I found boot tracks that belonged to the adult leaders, and smaller sneaker prints from the girls. The trail led away from the camping spot and deeper into the forest, toward an area I'd never explored myself. That should have been my first real warning sign. In 14 years, I thought I'd walked every inch of these mountains. But this trail led to a place that felt forgotten, like it had been hidden on purpose. As I followed the footprints, I noticed something else strange. The trees around me were scarred. Deep scratches ran up and down the bark, too high for any animal I knew about. Some of the marks looked fresh, but others were old and weathered, like they'd been there for years. The path wound down into a hollow I'd never seen before. The sides were steep and rocky, covered with thick patches of mountain laurel that blocked most of the light. At the bottom, I could make out the crumbling remains of old stone foundations. Somebody had lived here once, a long time ago, but it was what I found scratched into the trees that made my hands shake as I reached for my radio to call for backup. Carved into the bark, right at a 10-year-old's eye level, were drawings. Stick figures of children holding hands around a tall figure with long, flowing hair. The carvings looked fresh. The Girl Scouts had been here. But where were they now? I tried my radio, but all I got was static. The hollow was too deep, surrounded by too much rock and tree cover. I was on my own until I could get back to higher ground. That's when I heard it. Faint at first, like an echo carried on wind that wasn't there. The sound of children laughing. I stood there for a long moment, listening hard. The laughter came again, drifting through the trees like smoke. It sounded happy, playful, exactly what you'd expect from a group of Girl Scouts having fun at camp. But something about it made the hair on my arms stand up. I called out, "Hello, Troop 247. Mrs. Patterson." The laughter stopped immediately. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the forest was holding its breath. I started walking toward where I thought the sound had come from, following a faint path that wound deeper into the hollow. The stone foundations I'd seen turned out to be the remains of several buildings, probably a homestead from the 1800s. Whoever had lived here had built it to last. The stones were fitted together without mortar, the way mountain people used to do it when they planned to stay put. Between the ruins, I found the first real evidence that the Girl Scouts had been here. A bright blue sleeping bag was wedged under a fallen tree, torn and muddy. Near it, I spotted a yellow camp cup, the kind with the Girl Scout logo on the side. Then, another sleeping bag. This one green, hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground. But what really stopped me cold was what I found in the center of the old homestead. Someone had arranged rocks in a perfect circle, and inside that circle were 8 small backpacks, each one opened and emptied. The contents, clothes, toiletries, snacks, were spread out in neat little piles, like a store display. I knelt down to examine the backpacks. Each one had a name tag: Sarah, Emma, Jessica, Lily, Maria, Hannah, Zoe, and Kayla. The troop roster I carried in my pocket confirmed these were our missing girls. But where were Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen's things? That's when I noticed the footprints around the circle. Small bare feet, but something was off about them. The toes seemed too long, and there were marks in the dirt that looked almost like claw scratches. I was still trying to make sense of what I was seeing when my radio crackled to life. The voice that came through was scratchy with static, but I could make out most of it. "Catherine, this is base. We've got Dr. Rebecca Hayes and Jim Crowfeather heading your way. ETA 20 minutes. Rebecca was our consulting child psychologist, someone we called in when dealing with lost kids who might be traumatized. Jim was the best tracker in 3 counties, half Cherokee and half mountain man, with eyes that could spot a broken twig from 50 yards away. I keyed my radio. Copy that, tell them to bring rope and climbing gear. And I hesitated, not sure how to explain what I was feeling. Tell them to bring tranquilizer equipment. Tranquilizers? Catherine, what exactly are you dealing with out there? I looked around at the arranged backpacks, at the sleeping bags hung like decorations in the trees, at the claw marks in the soft earth. I'm not sure yet, I said. While I waited for backup, I decided to search the area more thoroughly. The old homestead was bigger than I'd first realized, with foundations for at least 6 different buildings scattered through the hollow. As I explored, I found more evidence that the Girl Scouts had been here, but it was all wrong. Their clothes were woven into the branches of trees, creating what looked like crude nests 15 feet off the ground. Pieces of their camping gear were mixed with animal bones and bird feathers, arranged in patterns I didn't understand. And everywhere, scratched into tree bark and carved into stone, were those same stick figure drawings of children holding hands around a tall figure. The most disturbing find was near what had probably been the main house. Someone had used small stones to spell out words on the ground. Mother calls us home. I was photographing this message when I heard vehicles approaching from above. Rebecca and Jim had made good time. I hiked back up to meet them, grateful to see familiar faces. Dr. Rebecca Hayes was in her mid-40s, with graying brown hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail. She'd been helping us with family programs for about 5 years, and I'd never seen anything shake her calm, professional demeanor. Until that day, Jim Crowfeather looked like he'd stepped out of an old Western movie, tall, lean, with long black hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. He carried a rifle along with his tracking gear, which should have made me feel safer. Instead, it just reminded me that we might need it. I filled them in on what I'd found as we hiked down into the hollow. Rebecca listened with the focused attention of someone taking mental notes, while Jim kept scanning the trees around us like he expected something to jump out. When we reached the circle of backpacks, Rebecca crouched down and examined the contents carefully. The arrangement isn't random, she said after a few minutes. Someone with knowledge of child psychology organized these items. See how each girl's things are grouped by importance? Comfort items closest to the center, practical items on the outside. What does that tell us? I asked. Whoever did this understands how children think and what makes them feel secure. They're not dealing with a random kidnapper or someone who just stumbled across the camp. Jim had been walking the perimeter, studying the ground. Now he returned with a grim expression. We've got bigger problems, he said. I found tracks leading away from here, adult boot prints, but they're being dragged, not walking. My stomach dropped. The leaders. That's what I'm thinking. And Catherine. He pointed to a tree about 20 yards away. Take a look at that. I followed his pointing finger and saw something that made my knees weak. Hanging from a high branch, torn and blood-stained, was a piece of orange fabric. The same bright orange as the safety vests Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen had been wearing. But it was hanging 30 feet off the ground, wrapped around a branch no human could have reached without serious climbing equipment. As we stared up at it, the children's laughter echoed through the hollow again. This time, it was closer, and there was something about it that didn't sound quite right. It was too high-pitched, too wild, like the sound children might make if they'd forgotten how to be human. Jim raised his rifle and started scanning the trees. We're being watched, he said quietly. That's when I saw them for the first time. Just glimpses, like shadows moving between the trees. Small figures that seemed to flow from branch to branch with impossible speed and grace. For just a moment, one of them paused in a patch of sunlight, and I got a clear look. It was a little girl, maybe 11 years old, with tangled blonde hair and a torn yellow camp shirt. But her skin was pale as moonlight, her fingers seemed too long, and when she opened her mouth to laugh, I could swear I saw too many teeth. Then she was gone, vanishing into the green canopy like she'd never been there at all. Did you see that? Rebecca whispered. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Jim lowered his rifle and looked at us with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Fear. We need to get out of here, he said. Right now. But even as he said it, we all knew it was too late. The laughter was coming from all around us now, echoing off the stone ruins and bouncing between the trees. And in that sound, I could hear something that chilled me to the bone. I could hear names being called: Sarah, Emma, Jessica, Lily, Maria, Hannah, Zoe, Kayla. The missing Girl Scouts were calling to us from somewhere in the canopy above, but they didn't sound like they wanted to be rescued. They sounded like they were hunting. We huddled together in the center of the old homestead as the voices circled overhead. Rebecca had gone pale, her professional composure cracking as the reality of what we were seeing sank in. Jim kept his rifle ready, tracking the movement in the trees. But I could tell he was struggling with the same thing I was. How do you fight children? They're up there, Rebecca whispered, pointing to the thick canopy above us. All of them. But something's wrong with the way they're moving. I knew what she meant. Normal kids don't leap from tree to tree like squirrels. They don't hang from branches 30 feet up without any fear of falling. And they definitely don't coordinate their movements like a pack of wolves. We need to try talking to them, I said. As someone who'd spent years working with children, every instinct I had was screaming at me to help these girls, not run from them. I cupped my hands around my mouth and called up into the trees. Sarah, Emma, it's Ranger Catherine. Your families are worried about you. The movement above us stopped. For a moment, the forest went completely silent again. Then a voice drifted down from the branches. Young, sweet, and wrong in every possible way. Mother says we can't come down anymore. Mother says the ground makes us weak. I recognized the voice. It was Emma Chen, the troop leader's daughter. She was 10 years old, loved horses, and had earned her camping badge just last month. Now she sounded like something pretending to be a little girl. Emma, honey, where's your mom? Where's Mrs. Patterson? Giggles answered me, high and wild. Not just from Emma, but from all around us, like a chorus of broken music boxes. They tried to take us away from Mother, another voice called down. This one I thought was Lily, the quiet girl who always stayed close to the adults. But Mother keeps her children safe. Mother keeps us fed. Jim tapped my shoulder and pointed to the base of a large oak tree. There, almost hidden by fallen leaves, was something that made my stomach turn over. A woman's hiking boot, torn and stained dark with what I desperately hoped was mud. As I stared at the boot, Rebecca grabbed my arm. Catherine, look at the trees. I looked up and gasped. The girls were descending, moving down the trunk, head first, like spiders. Their pale fingers finding holds in the bark that shouldn't have been possible. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves, I could see how much they'd changed. Their skin had gone white as paper, stretched tight over bones that seemed longer than they should be. Their hair hung in matted tangles, filled with leaves and twigs. Worst of all were their eyes, still the bright colors I remembered from their camp photos, but now reflecting light like an animal's. Sarah Martinez, who'd always been the leader of the group, clung to a branch about 15 feet up and smiled down at us. Her teeth looked sharp. Ranger Catherine, she called out, her voice bright with false cheer. Do you want to meet Mother? She's been waiting for you. That's when we heard it. A sound from deeper in the hollow that made every survival instinct I had scream at me to run. It was like a lullaby, but sung in a voice too deep and too old, with words in a language I didn't recognize. The melody seemed to wrap around my brain, making it hard to think clearly. Jim shook his head hard, like he was trying to clear it. We have to move, he said through gritted teeth. That song, it's doing something to us. He was right. I could feel my thoughts getting fuzzy, my concern for the girls starting to override my sense of danger. The rational part of my mind knew something terrible had happened to these children, but the maternal part of me just wanted to climb up and bring them down safely. Rebecca was swaying slightly, a dreamy expression on her face. Maybe we should listen, she murmured. Maybe Mother knows what's best for them. I slapped her, hard. The sharp crack of my palm against her cheek cut through the lullaby's influence, and her eyes snapped back into focus. Thanks, she gasped. What was that? Before I could answer, Jim let out a shout of warning. One of the girls, I think it was Zoe, had dropped from her branch and was crouching on the stone foundation just 10 feet away from us. Up close, the changes in her were even more disturbing. Her fingers ended in what looked like claws, and when she smiled, I counted at least 20 teeth in her mouth. Mother wants to meet the lady who takes care of children, Zoe said in a sing-song voice. Mother says you understand about keeping little ones safe. "Where is your mother?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Zoe giggled and pointed deeper into the hollow, toward a section thick with mountain laurel and rhododendron. "She's in the deep place. She's been waiting so long for new daughters." That's when Jim made his decision. He raised the rifle and pointed it at Zoe, his hands shaking. "I don't want to hurt you, little girl, but you need to stay back." Zoe's expression changed in an instant, her false sweetness replaced by something feral and hungry. She hissed, actually hissed like a cat, and I saw her muscles tense for a spring. She never got the chance. Jim's shot rang out across the hollow, but not at Zoe. He'd fired into the air, hoping the loud noise would scare the children back. Instead, it brought them all down at once. 8 pale figures dropped from the trees like falling leaves, landing in perfect silence all around us. They moved in coordination, spreading out to cut off our escape routes, their heads tilted at angles that reminded me of birds studying insects. "You shouldn't have made loud noises," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of sadness that was somehow worse than anger. "Mother doesn't like loud noises. Now she's upset." The lullaby from deeper in the hollow had stopped, replaced by something that sounded like breathing, but too deep and too slow to be human. The temperature around us seemed to drop 10 degrees, and I could see our breath misting in the suddenly cold air. "Run," I whispered to Rebecca and Jim. "Back the way we came. I'll try to distract them." "We're not leaving you," Rebecca said firmly. "You have to," I said, keeping my eyes on the circle of transformed children. "Someone has to get word out about this. Someone has to warn people." But we were too late for running. From the thick vegetation at the far end of the hollow came a sound like trees creaking in a strong wind. Something very large was moving toward us, pushing through branches that should have been too thick to pass. Then the bushes parted, and I saw the mountain mother for the first time. She was tall, at least 12 feet, with skin the color of old bone and hair that flowed around her like water. Her face might have been beautiful once, but now it was stretched and angular, with eyes like black pools that seemed to reflect starlight even in the middle of the day. She wore what looked like a dress made from moss and vines, and when she moved, flowers bloomed and died in her footsteps. "My children," she said in a voice like wind through empty rooms, "you've brought me visitors." The transformed Girl Scouts immediately rushed to surround her, climbing up her tall frame like she was a living tree. She reached down with fingers that were too long and too graceful, stroking their matted hair with obvious affection. "Such good daughters," she crooned. "Such beautiful, wild daughters." She looked directly at me then, and I felt like I was drowning in those starlight eyes. "You care for children," she said. It wasn't a question. "You understand the pain of watching them grow up and leave. I can smell it on you. The sorrow of every child you've had to let go." She was right, and somehow she knew it. Every year, I watched kids grow up and move away from the mountains, leaving for college and careers and lives I could never be part of. Every family that completed one of my programs and never came back left a little hole in my heart. "I keep mine forever," the mountain mother continued, her voice getting softer and more hypnotic. "They never have to grow old, never have to face the pain of the adult world. They stay with me, safe and wild and free." One of the girls, Hannah, I think, looked down at me from the mother's shoulder and smiled. "It's better here, Ranger Catherine. No homework, no chores. No one telling us to be quiet or sit still. We can climb as high as we want," added Maria from the mother's other side. "We can run through the trees all night. We can be loud. We can hunt," said Sarah. And the way she said it made my blood run cold. The mountain mother took a step closer, and I could smell her. Earth and flowers and something else, something that reminded me of very old bones. "Give me your friends," she said, gesturing toward Rebecca and Jim. "They're too old to change properly, but they have knowledge I can use. Give them to me willingly, and I'll let you choose how you join my family." That's when I understood what had happened to Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen. They hadn't just been killed, they'd been offered as food to keep these transformed children strong. I looked at Rebecca, who was staring up at the mountain mother with a mixture of terror and fascination. I looked at Jim, who had his rifle raised but couldn't bring himself to fire at the children surrounding the creature. And I made a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "No," I said. The mountain mother's expression didn't change, but the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. "Then," she said softly, "you'll all stay, forever." The Mountain Mother raised one impossibly long hand, and the 8 transformed girls moved as one. But instead of attacking us directly, they began to circle, their feet making no sound on the leaf-covered ground. As they moved, they started to hum. Not the hypnotic lullaby from before, but something deeper, something that seemed to resonate in my bones. "Catherine," Rebecca whispered, "I think I know what's happening here." She was staring at the children with the focused intensity of someone putting together a puzzle. Even in our desperate situation, the psychologist in her was still working. "This isn't random," she continued, her voice barely audible. "The transformation, the behavior patterns, the way they move together, this is systematic. She's not just changing them physically. She's rebuilding their entire psychological structure." Jim kept his rifle trained on the Mountain Mother, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. "Rebecca, this isn't the time for analysis." "No, listen," Rebecca said urgently. "If I'm right about this, there might be something left of who they were, some core that she can't reach." The Mountain Mother must have heard us talking, because her laugh echoed through the hollow like breaking glass. "The clever woman thinks she understands," the creature said. "She thinks love can overcome transformation. She thinks human attachment is stronger than my gifts." She gestured, and one of the girls stepped forward. It was Jessica, the youngest member of the troop, at barely 10 years old. Her blonde hair had turned white as snow, and her blue eyes now reflected light like a cat's, but there was something in her expression that seemed almost uncertain. "Tell them, little Jessica," the Mountain Mother commanded. "Tell them how much better this life is." Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. For just a moment, her face scrunched up the way it used to when she was trying to solve a difficult math problem. I miss my mom," she said quietly. The Mountain Mother's expression darkened. "No, child, you don't miss anything from before. Your mother was weak. She would have let you grow up and become weak too. But she used to sing to me," Jessica continued, her voice getting stronger. "She used to make pancakes on Saturday mornings. She used to." The Mountain Mother struck faster than a snake, her elongated hand grasping Jessica by the throat. The little girl's eyes rolled back, and when she opened them again, the uncertainty was gone. "I don't remember any mother," Jessica said in a flat, emotionless voice. "Only mother. Only here." Rebecca stepped forward despite the danger. "You're losing them," she called out to the Mountain Mother. "That's why you need fresh ones, isn't it? The transformation isn't permanent. It takes constant reinforcement to maintain." The creature's starlight eyes fixed on Rebecca with hatred. "You know nothing about my children." "I know about trauma response," Rebecca shot back. "I know about dissociation and psychological conditioning. You're not transforming these girls. You're fracturing them, breaking their minds so thoroughly that they can't remember who they were." But the cracks are starting to show. As if responding to Rebecca's words, I saw something flicker across Sarah's face. A moment of confusion, like someone waking up from a deep dream. "Sarah," I called out, using my most authoritative ranger voice. "Sarah Martinez. Your mother's name is Elena. Your father's name is Carlos. You have a little brother named Diego who's learning to ride a bike." Sarah's head snapped toward me, and for a heartbeat, I saw recognition in her eyes. "You're in 4th grade at Valley Elementary," I continued. "Your teacher's name is Mrs. Henderson. You lost a tooth last month and put it under your pillow." "Stop," the Mountain Mother commanded, but I could hear uncertainty in her voice. "You want to be a veterinarian when you grow up," I pressed on. "You have a stuffed elephant named Peanut that you've had since you were 3. Sarah made a sound that might have been a sob. "Peanut," she whispered. That's when everything went wrong. The Mountain Mother let out a shriek of rage that shattered every piece of glass in the abandoned homestead. The other transformed girls collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads as if in terrible pain. And something new emerged from the thick vegetation behind the creature. It was Mrs. Patterson, or what was left of her. She moved with the same impossible grace as the children, but the transformation had been incomplete. Her adult body hadn't adapted to the changes the way the girls had. Her limbs were elongated and twisted, her face stretched into something that barely looked human. When she opened her mouth to speak, black blood poured out. "You shouldn't have come here," she gurgled, her voice like rocks grinding together. "She needs fresh ones." Jim's rifle boomed, but Mrs. Patterson moved faster than anything human should have been able to, dodging the bullet and leaping at him with claws extended. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the stone foundation. The Mountain Mother used the distraction to advance on Rebecca and me. Up close, she was even more terrifying. I could see that her dress wasn't made of moss and vines, but of hair. Children's hair, woven together into a garment that moved with its own life. "You understand," she said to me, her voice suddenly gentle. "You've dedicated your life to protecting children. I'm offering you the same thing, a chance to keep them safe forever. No harm can come to them here. No one can take them away." For a moment, I felt the pull of what she was offering. How many nights had I lain awake worrying about kids I'd taught to be safe in the wilderness? How many times had I wished I could protect every child who came through my programs? But then I heard Jim scream from where he was fighting the transformed Mrs. Patterson, and I remembered what protection really meant. "You're not protecting them," I said. "You're stealing them." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the tranquilizer gun I'd brought, the one designed for capturing dangerous animals. But instead of pointing it at the Mountain Mother, I aimed it at Sarah. "If you take one more step," I told the creature, "I'll put her to sleep. Then I'll carry her out of here. Back to her real family." The Mountain Mother froze. "You wouldn't hurt a child. To save her? Yes, I would." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in those starlight eyes. That's when Rebecca made her move. While the Mountain Mother was focused on me, she stepped up behind Sarah and wrapped the confused girl in her arms. "Sarah, listen to my voice," Rebecca said urgently. "Remember who you are. Remember Peanut. Remember your mother singing to you." "No," the Mountain Mother shrieked, but it was too late. Sarah looked up at Rebecca with human eyes, confused, frightened, but human. "I want to go home," she whispered. The other transformed girls screamed in unison, a sound that brought down dead branches from the trees overhead. But in their voices, I heard something else, other names, other memories trying to surface. The Mountain Mother's form began to flicker, like an image on a broken television. "You don't understand," she said, her voice becoming desperate. "Without me, they'll die. The transformation can't be undone. They need me to live." "Then you should have thought of that before you stole them," I said, and fired the tranquilizer dart into the creature's chest. She looked down at the dart in surprise, then back up at me with something that might have been respect. "Clever," she said, "but it won't hold me for long, and you can't save them all." She was right. Even as Sarah became more human in Rebecca's arms, I could see the other girls fighting against their returning memories, caught between two realities. Jessica was crying tears of blood. Emma was clawing at her own face. Behind us, Jim's fight with Mrs. Patterson had gone quiet. The Mountain Mother smiled as the tranquilizer began to take effect. "Choose," she said, her words starting to slur. "Save the one, and watch the others tear themselves apart trying to remember what they've lost. Or give me the little one back, and I'll let the rest of you leave." I looked at Sarah, fully human now, but shaking with trauma. I looked at the other girls, trapped between transformation and memory. I looked at Rebecca, who was crying as she held tight to the child in her arms. And I made the hardest decision of my life. "We're taking them all," I said. "Every single one." The Mountain Mother's laugh followed us as we ran from the hollow, carrying as many of the girls as we could. It echoed in my ears, even after we reached my truck and drove away from that cursed place. Some promises, I learned that day, are worth breaking your heart to keep. We got 6 of them out alive. Sarah and Emma recovered completely after 3 weeks in the hospital, though they still have nightmares. Jessica and Maria are doing better, but they can't be in the dark alone anymore. Hannah speaks in whispers now, and only to other children. Zoe hasn't spoken at all since we brought her back. Kayla and Lily didn't make it. The transformation had gone too deep, and the shock of returning to human consciousness was more than their small bodies could handle. They died holding hands in the hospital, and I still wake up some nights thinking about that. Jim survived his fight with Mrs. Patterson, but he left the mountains after that. Last I heard, he was working security in Florida, as far from the wilderness as he could get. He sends me a Christmas card every year, with just his name signed at the bottom. Rebecca stayed in the area. She's devoted her practice to helping children who've experienced supernatural trauma, though she can never put that in any official report. Sometimes late at night, she calls me to talk about the girls, about what we saw, about whether we made the right choice. We never found Mrs. Chen's body. The official report listed the incident as an animal attack. The families of the girls were relocated under the Witness Protection Program, their identities changed, their lives rebuilt somewhere far from Virginia. The hollow where we found them was declared a protected wildlife habitat, off limits to hikers and campers. But I never left. I've been monitoring these mountains for 15 years since that April day, watching for signs that she's stirring again. Because the tranquilizer didn't kill the mountain mother, I knew it wouldn't. Creatures like her don't die easily. They just sleep and wait and dream of new children to collect. Every spring, when the heavy rains come and the mountains reveal their hidden places, I check the missing persons reports from neighboring counties. There are always more than there should be. Children who wander off from campsites, families who take a wrong turn and disappear, kids who go out to play and never come home. Last month, I found fresh carvings in the trees near the sealed-off hollow, stick figures holding hands around a tall figure with flowing hair. The wood was still bleeding sap where the knives had cut. I've trained other rangers now, taught them what to look for, how to spot the signs when something unnatural is moving through their territory. Most of them think I'm paranoid, damaged by that one bad experience 20 years ago. But some of them listen. Some of them have seen things in the deep woods that don't belong in any nature guide. We call ourselves the Watchers now, though that's not in any official paperwork. We share information, cover each other's territories, and most importantly, we remember. Because there are things in these mountains that feed on forgotten children, and the only defense against them is refusing to forget. If you're reading this, you're probably planning a family camping trip. You're probably thinking about taking your kids into the wilderness to show them the beauty of nature, to teach them self-reliance, to give them memories that will last a lifetime. Do it. The mountains are beautiful, and children need to experience that beauty. But follow these rules, and follow them exactly. Never let children out of your sight, especially near old homestead ruins or abandoned settlements. Never ignore your dogs if they refuse to go down a certain path. Never dismiss the feeling that you're being watched. And if you hear children laughing in the woods when there shouldn't be any children around, pack up your camp immediately and leave. Don't investigate. Don't try to help. Don't think you can handle whatever is making that sound. Just run. Because somewhere in these mountains, in the deep places where the maps don't go, the mountain mother is still waiting for her next brood. And next time, I might not be close enough to help. My name is Catherine Ravenwood, and I've been watching the mountains for 34 years now. Some days, I think about retiring, about leaving these dark hollows to someone else. But then I remember Sarah Martinez clutching that stuffed elephant when we reunited her with her family. I remember Emma Chen's first real smile after the nightmares stopped. I remember 6 little girls who got to grow up because someone was there to bring them home. And I stay, because someone has to watch for the children who can't watch for themselves. Someone has to remember the ones who were forgotten. Someone has to stand between the families seeking adventure and the things that hunt them in the dark. That someone is me, and I'll keep watching until the day I die, or until the mountain mother finally claims me as her own. Whichever comes first. My name is Jonathan Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. I've pulled broken climbers off cliff faces, guided lost hikers through blizzards, and talked down people standing too close to the edge. After nearly 2 decades working the high peaks of Grandfather Mountain in North Carolina, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. Before I tell you what happened in September of 1982, you need to understand something about me. I don't believe in ghost stories. Never have. When climbers came down babbling about shadow people on the cliffs, I'd pat their shoulder and explain altitude sickness. When locals whispered about Cherokee spirits guarding the mountain, I'd nod politely and change the subject. I'm a practical man. I trust my rope, my training, and my own 2 eyes. That confidence came from experience. At 46, I'd been climbing since I was 16. I knew every route on Grandfather Mountain, every handhold, every dangerous spot where the rock crumbled under your fingers. I'd trained rescue teams, taught climbing safety, and completed over 200 high-altitude rescues. The mountains were my home, and I understood them the way a sailor understands the sea. Or so I thought. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in early September. The weather was perfect, clear skies, cool temperatures, light wind, perfect climbing conditions. A team of 4 experienced mountaineers had gone up 3 days earlier for a technical multi-day ascent. They were supposed to radio in every 12 hours. They'd missed their last 2 check-ins. I wasn't worried at first. Radios die, people forget, but when sunrise came with still no word, I knew something was wrong. I gathered my rescue team at dawn. Maria Santos, our best technical specialist, arrived first. She was 32, tough as boot leather, and could climb routes that made grown men cry. Derek Thompson came next, younger guy, maybe 28, strong and eager but still learning. Both of them were certified for high-angle rescue work. Could be anything, Derek said as we loaded gear into the truck. Dead battery, bad weather, equipment failure. All 4 of them? Maria asked. For 18 hours? I didn't answer. Something in my gut felt wrong, but I couldn't explain why. We drove up the access road as far as we could, then started the hike to where their last known position had been marked on the map. The forest felt different that morning, too quiet. I've walked these trails thousands of times, and there's always sound: birds calling, squirrels rustling through leaves, insects buzzing. That day, nothing. Just our boots crunching on fallen pine needles, and our breathing getting harder as we climbed. "Where are the birds?" Maria said after an hour of hiking. I'd been wondering the same thing. Not a single raven, not even a crow. The high-altitude birds that usually circled the peaks were just gone. We reached the base of the climbing route around noon. The missing team had anchored their base camp here, 2 tents, equipment bags, everything still in place. But something was wrong with it. The tents were set up perfectly, stakes driven in at exact angles, guy lines taut and even. Too perfect, like someone had arranged them for a photograph. "Nobody camps this neat," Derek said, echoing my thoughts. Maria was examining the climbing equipment they'd left behind. She held up a rope, her face puzzled. "Jonathan, look at this." The rope was tied in a knot I'd never seen before. It looked almost like a figure 8. But wrong, the loops went through themselves, in a way that shouldn't be possible. I've been tying climbing knots for 30 years. This wasn't a climbing knot. This wasn't any knot I recognized. Maybe they were practicing something new? Derek suggested. With their safety line? Maria shook her head. No way. I pulled out my binoculars and scanned the cliff face above us. The route they'd taken went straight up a granite wall, over 800 feet of technical climbing. About halfway up, I could see something on a ledge, something that might be gear or might be something else. "We need to go up," I said. The climb should have been routine. I'd done this exact route dozens of times, but 10 minutes in, my rope started acting strange. It felt heavier than it should, like something was pulling on it from above, even though nothing was there. I looked down at Maria and Derek below me. They were both staring up, but not at me. At something beside me. "Jonathan," Maria called up, her voice tight. "Move to your right." Now, I looked left. The shadow my body cast on the rock face was pointing the wrong direction. The sun was behind me and to the right, so my shadow should have fallen left. But it was stretched out to my right instead, long and dark, reaching toward a crack in the rock. "That's not possible," I said quietly. The shadow moved. Not because I moved, not because the sun shifted. It moved on its own, sliding across the granite like oil, pulling away from my body and flowing up the cliff face. I watched it go, my brain refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Shadows don't move by themselves. They can't. But this one did. I made it to the ledge where I'd seen the equipment. My hands were shaking as I pulled myself over the edge. And not from effort. I've climbed in hurricanes without shaking. But watching my shadow crawl away from me like a living thing had broken something in my understanding of how the world worked. The ledge was 20 feet wide and relatively flat, a good resting spot. 3 climbing harnesses lay arranged in a perfect triangle. Empty, the rope connecting them was still clipped in, but it ended in the middle of the ledge, cut clean. Not frayed like it had been worn through. Not melted like it had been burned. Cut, as if with a very sharp knife. But that wasn't the disturbing part. Each harness had a shadow beneath it. Dark silhouettes on the rock that looked exactly like human shadows. Head, shoulders, arms, legs. But there was nothing above them to cast those shadows. The sun was high and bright. Those shadows shouldn't exist. Jonathan? Derek's voice crackled through the radio. What do you see? I couldn't answer. I was staring at one of the shadows. It was moving. Just slightly, like someone was breathing. The edges rippled like water. Jonathan, respond. Get up here, I managed. Both of you, now. They reached the ledge 15 minutes later. By then, I'd searched every inch of it. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just the harnesses and those impossible shadows. Maria saw them immediately. What the hell is that? I don't know. Derek walked toward one of the shadows. Maybe it's some kind of stain, oil, or something? Derek, don't. He put his boot on the shadow. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 1 second. I saw my breath fog in front of my face. Derek's breath too. He was standing perfectly still, foot in the middle of the shadow, staring down at it with his mouth open. I can't move, he whispered. Maria and I rushed forward and grabbed him, pulling him backward. His boot came out of the shadow with a sucking sound, like pulling your foot out of thick mud. The moment he was clear, the temperature returned to normal. The cold vanished as quickly as it had come. Derek was breathing hard, his face pale. It was pulling on me. I could feel it pulling me down into the rock. We left the ledge. None of us said anything as we climbed higher, but I could feel them both looking at me, waiting for me to explain it. I couldn't. I had no explanation. The next ledge was 300 feet up. We found the first body there. His name was Michael Torres. I'd checked his climbing permit myself a week ago. Nice guy, early 30s, experienced mountaineer. Now he was lying on his back on the ledge, hands crossed over his chest like he'd been arranged for a funeral. His eyes were open, staring at the sky. He looked 80 years old. I'd met Michael. I'd shaken his hand. He was 32 with dark hair and smooth skin. The man on the ledge had white hair, liver spots, wrinkled skin like crumpled paper, but it was him. Same face, just decades older. That's not possible, Maria said. She kept saying it over and over. That's not possible. That's not possible. I checked for a pulse anyway. Dead, probably for hours. His skin was cold. I pulled out my radio to call it in, but my hand froze when I saw the shadow on the wall behind the body. It was shaped like a person. A tall person, maybe 7 feet, standing with arms outstretched. But there was nothing casting it, no rock formation, no equipment, nothing. Just the shadow itself, black as ink, impossibly dark against the gray stone. As I watched, it moved. It tilted its head, the way a dog does when it hears something interesting. Then it stepped off the wall. I don't know how else to describe it. The shadow peeled away from the rock like paper peeling off a wall, becoming three-dimensional. It stayed black, stayed shadow, but now it had depth. It was standing on the ledge with us, 8 feet away, shaped like a man but made of pure darkness. Derek screamed. I don't blame him. I wanted to scream too. The shadow thing took a step toward us. Not walking, exactly. More like it flowed forward, the bottom of it rippling across the stone. Where it moved, the rock underneath turned darker, like the shadow was staining it. Back up, I said quietly. Slowly, nobody run. We edged backward toward the cliff edge. The shadow kept coming. It raised one arm. I could see the shape of fingers. Long and thin, and pointed at Derek. Why is it pointing at me? Derek's voice was high and thin. Jonathan, why is it pointing at me? I didn't have an answer. The shadow flowed closer. 10 feet away. 8 feet. Clip in and rappel, I ordered. Now, we clipped our ropes to the anchor points and dropped over the edge of the ledge. I was last, my fingers fumbling with the carabiner, watching the shadow flow toward me. It reached the edge and stopped, as if it couldn't or wouldn't come over. It just stood there, that arm still pointing down at us as we descended. I looked up once as we rappelled down. The shadow was leaning over the edge, watching us go. Behind it, I could see Michael Torres's body, aged and dead. And beyond that, painted on the cliff face in shadow that shouldn't exist, I saw them. Dozens of human shapes. Hundreds. All different sizes, all in different positions, standing, sitting, reaching out. All made of shadow, all impossible. What is this place? Maria whispered. I didn't answer. I was starting to understand, and the understanding was worse than the not knowing. The Cherokee called this mountain Tanawa. They said it meant great hawk or eagle. But Maria's grandmother had told her different stories. Stories about a guardian, a protector, something that lived in the shadows and kept watch over sacred places. Something that didn't like intruders. We made it back to the base camp as the sun was starting to set. None of us wanted to climb in the dark, not after what we'd seen. We radioed for additional support, called in the death, and requested a helicopter for body recovery at first light. The dispatcher sounded annoyed that we weren't bringing Michael's body down ourselves, but she hadn't seen what we'd seen. She hadn't watched a shadow walk. Derek was quiet, staring at his hands. Maria was checking her climbing gear obsessively, testing every carabiner, examining every inch of rope. I built a fire. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. 19 years of rational explanations, of scientific thinking, of professional skepticism, all of it crashing against what I'd witnessed on that ledge. My grandmother warned me, Maria said suddenly. When I told her I was working Grandfather Mountain, she begged me not to take the job. What did she say? I asked. That the mountain was protected, that something lived in the shadows here, something old. She said the Cherokee knew to respect it, to leave it alone. Maria looked up at the darkening cliff face above us. She said it aged people, took their time and made it its own. That's just a story, Derek said, but his voice had no confidence in it. Michael was aged, I said quietly. 30 years, maybe 40. In less than 3 days, we sat in silence, watching the fire. The shadows it cast seemed to move wrong, stretching too far, bending at odd angles. Or maybe that was just my paranoia. What about the others? Derek asked. The rest of the climbing team. If Michael is dead up there, he didn't need to finish. We all knew. 3 more climbers were somewhere on that cliff face, and if Michael had been aged to death, what had happened to them? I made the decision. We go back up at first light. We find them, we bring everyone down. Jonathan, Maria started. I know, but I can't leave them up there. The night was the longest of my life. We took turns keeping watch, but I don't think any of us really slept. The forest around us stayed silent, no animals, no insects, no sound except the wind through the trees. And the shadows from our fire kept moving in ways that shadows shouldn't move. Around 2 a.m, during Derek's watch, he shook me awake. Something's wrong with the shadows, he whispered. I sat up. The fire had burned down to embers, giving off just enough light to see by. Our 3 shadows stretched out behind us, cast by the dying firelight, except there were 4 shadows. The 4th one was standing between Derek and Maria. Tall, thin, humanoid. It had no source. Nothing was casting it. It was just there, darker than the darkness around it, shaped like a person with arms too long and fingers that tapered to points. Don't move, I breathed. The shadow turned its head toward me. I could see no face, no features, but I felt it looking at me, studying me. And then, with a movement that made my skin crawl, it pointed at Derek, just like the shadow on the ledge had pointed at him. Why does it keep doing that? Derek's voice cracked. What does it want? The shadow moved. It flowed across the ground like spilled ink, heading straight for Derek. He scrambled backward, grabbing for his flashlight. The beam hit the shadow, and nothing. The light went right through it. Didn't slow it down, didn't stop it, didn't even make it fade. The shadow kept coming. Run, I shouted. We ran. I don't know where we thought we were going. We were miles from the truck, hours from help, but instinct took over. We crashed through the forest, flashlights bouncing, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us, I could hear something. Not footsteps. More like a rushing sound, like wind through a tunnel. Maria went down hard, tripping over a root. Derek and I grabbed her arms and hauled her up. That's when I looked back and saw them. Shadows. Dozens of them. Flowing between the trees, keeping pace with us easily. They moved faster than we could run, sliding over logs and rocks, merging and splitting like liquid. In the darkness of the forest, they were almost invisible, just shapes of deeper black against the night. The clearing, Maria gasped, pointing ahead. We burst out into a small meadow where moonlight came through. The shadows stopped at the tree line. They gathered there, dozens of dark shapes, standing perfectly still, watching us. They won't come into the light, Derek panted. Open light, they need shadows to move through. He was right. In the direct moonlight of the clearing, there were no shadows for them to hide in. We stood in the center of the meadow, surrounded by darkness, watching those things wait at the edges. "What are they waiting for?" Maria asked. I looked up. Clouds were moving across the sky, heading for the moon. Big, thick clouds, the kind that block out light completely. "They're waiting for it to get dark," I said. We had maybe 5 minutes before those clouds covered the moon. 5 minutes to figure out how to survive until dawn. I pulled out my emergency signal flares. Every ranger carries them for search and rescue operations. They burn bright enough to be seen for miles, hot enough to start a fire. I'd never thought I'd use them to fight shadow monsters, but here we were. "When the moon goes dark, I'm lighting these," I said. "The light should keep them back." "Should?" Derek repeated. "You got a better idea?" He didn't. The clouds rolled closer, the moonlight dimmed. At the edge of the clearing, the shadows began to move, flowing forward like a tide, testing the light, seeing how far they could come. "Jonathan," Maria said softly, "my grandmother said the Shadow Guardian protects the mountain from those who would harm it. But we're not harming anything, we're just trying to rescue people." "Maybe it doesn't see it that way," I said. "Maybe to something that old, all climbers look the same. All of us invaders." The moon disappeared behind the clouds. The meadow went dark. The shadows rushed forward. I lit the first flare. Red light exploded across the clearing, bright as daylight, hot as a furnace. The shadows recoiled like they'd hit a wall. They pulled back to the tree line, their shapes writhing and twisting. I could almost hear them, a sound like wind through dead leaves, or whispers in an empty room. "It's working!" Derek yelled. But I'd seen how long flares lasted, maybe 2 minutes. And I had 3 flares total. 6 minutes of light against hours until dawn. We weren't going to make it. That's when I saw him, standing at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the flare light. A tall figure, darker than the other shadows, more solid, more real. It stood perfectly still, while the others writhed and flowed around it, like a rock in a stream. And it was staring at Derek. "Derek," I said carefully, "I think it's you it wants." "What? Why?" Maria grabbed my arm. "The ledge." The shadow pointed at him on the ledge, and the one in camp pointed at him too. "But I didn't do anything." Derek's voice rose in panic. "I've never even climbed this mountain before today." The first flare sputtered and died. I lit the second immediately, but in that half-second of darkness, the shadows surged forward 10 feet. They were learning, getting bolder. "Think," I told Derek. "Is there anything, any reason this thing would want you specifically?" "I don't." He stopped. His face went pale. "Oh God." "What?" "Last summer, before I started working here, I was climbing in Colorado, and I found this old Cherokee ceremonial site. Up on a cliff face, there were these markings, petroglyphs. I took pictures, posted them online, got a lot of likes." Maria closed her eyes. "Derek, I didn't know. I thought I was sharing history. How was I supposed to know?" "Sacred sites," I said. "You documented a sacred site without permission, put it online for the world to see." The tall shadow at the tree line raised one arm. Every shadow in the clearing stopped moving. They all turned toward Derek. Hundreds of them, surrounding us, all focused on one target. "I'm sorry," Derek shouted at them. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'll delete the pictures. The second flare died. I fumbled for the third, my last one, but before I could light it, something grabbed Derek. Not the shadows, something else. The tall figure had moved, so fast I didn't see it happen, and now it was right behind Derek. I could see it more clearly now in the faint moonlight breaking through the clouds. It was huge, maybe 8 feet tall, shaped like a man but wrong, too thin, arms too long, fingers like knives. And where it touched Derek, his skin was turning gray. "No." Maria lunged forward. I grabbed her, held her back. The shadows were closing in from all sides. "I'm sorry," Derek whispered. His hair was turning white, wrinkles spreading across his face like cracks in glass. "Jonathan, I'm sorry, I didn't." His voice changed. Got older, got weaker. In the space of heartbeats, Derek aged from 28 to 50, to 70, to 90. "Let him go," I screamed. I lit the last flare and threw it at the tall shadow. It passed right through the dark figure, landing in the grass behind it. In the red light, I could see Derek clearly. He looked 100 years old. His climbing gear hung loose on his withered frame, his eyes were cloudy with cataracts. His hands, which had been strong enough to hold his full body weight on a cliff face, were now twisted with arthritis. The shadow released him. Derek collapsed. And just like that, all the shadows were gone. They flowed back into the forest, melting into the darkness beneath the trees. The tall figure was the last to go. It stood over Derek's body for a long moment, then looked at me and Maria. I felt its gaze like ice water in my veins. Then it was gone. We carried Derek's body back to base camp as the sun rose. He weighed almost nothing. Aged bodies are lighter, all the muscle and fat wasted away. His face was peaceful, at least. He looked like he'd died of old age. Natural causes, no pain. Just 90 years too early. Maria hadn't spoken since we'd picked him up. She was crying silently, tears running down her face, but she didn't make a sound. I wanted to cry too, but I was too numb, too shocked. My brain was refusing to process what I'd witnessed. The helicopter arrived at 8 a.m. The pilot took one look at Derek's body and went pale. "What the hell happened to him?" he demanded. "Altitude sickness," I lied. "Extreme case. We need to get him down and find the others." The pilot didn't believe me. I could see it in his face, but he didn't argue. He helped us load Derek's body, then called in the rest of the recovery team. By noon, we had 10 rangers on the mountain, all equipped for technical rescue. I didn't tell them about the shadows. How could I? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I was starting to think I was crazy. Maybe this was all altitude sickness. Maybe the stress of 19 years had finally broken something in my brain. But when we climbed back up to that ledge, Michael Torres's body was still there. Still aged. Still impossible. We found the second climber, Jessica Chen, 300 feet higher. She was 45 years old in her permit photo. She looked 90 now, dead for hours, positioned on a narrow ledge that should have been impossible to reach. The only way up to it was a completely smooth rock face, no handholds, no cracks, nothing to grip. "How did she get up there?" one of the new rangers asked. "I don't know," I said, but I did know. The shadows had put her there, arranged her there like a warning. We found the third and fourth climbers together, near the summit. Both aged beyond recognition, both positioned in spots that made no physical sense, one sitting on a tiny outcrop 200 feet straight up a vertical face, the other lying on a slope so steep that a normal body would have slid right off. By sunset, we'd recovered all 4 bodies. The official report said equipment failure and altitude sickness, extreme altitude sickness that caused rapid aging. The medical examiner looked at me like I was insane when I wrote that, but what else could I say? That a shadow monster aged them to death? That the mountain was protected by something ancient and angry? They'd lock me up. The funerals were held 2 weeks later. I went to all of them, sat in the back, listened to the families cry, and said nothing. What could I say? Sorry for your loss, but your loved one was killed by a supernatural guardian spirit because humans keep climbing on sacred land? Maria quit the ranger service, didn't even give 2 weeks' notice. She just packed her gear, handed in her badge, and left. I got a postcard from her 3 months later, postmarked from the Navajo Nation in Arizona. All it said was, "Some places are meant to be left alone." I should have quit too, but I didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was guilt, or maybe, deep down, I felt like I needed to understand. I started researching. Real research, not just the tourist-friendly Cherokee history in the visitor center brochures. I tracked down tribal elders, asked careful questions, listened to stories that hadn't been written down in any book. They knew about the shadow. They'd always known. Tanawa doesn't mean hawk, an elder named James Swimmer told me, sitting in his living room on the reservation. That's what we tell the white tourists because it's easier than the truth. Tanawa means the one who watches, the guardian. What is it? I asked. Is it a spirit, a demon? It's old, he said simply. Older than the Cherokee, older than humans on this continent. It was here first, and it will be here last. The mountain is its place, its sacred trust. It protects what is sacred from those who would desecrate. The climbers weren't trying to desecrate anything. They just wanted to climb. To you, climbing is sport. To Tanawa, it is invasion. Every spike driven into rock, every rope scarring stone, every boot crushing fragile plants, all desecration. Small ones, perhaps, but constant, endless. and Tanaha has no patience left. He poured me tea, his hands steady. He was old, maybe 90, but his eyes were sharp. "Why does it age people?" I asked. "Because time is what it guards. The mountain has been here for millions of years. We'll be here for millions more. Humans live such short lives, and we forget that. We think the mountain exists for us, for our enjoyment." Tanaha teaches the truth. It shows climbers how brief they are, how temporary, how insignificant. I thought about Derek, aging from 28 to 100 in minutes. About Michael and Jessica and the others, decades stolen from them in hours. "Can it be stopped?" I asked. James Swimmer smiled sadly. "Why would we want to stop it? It is doing what it was created to do. If humans stopped invading the mountain, Tanawa would sleep. The problem is not the Guardian. The problem is us." I drove back to Grandfather Mountain as the sun was setting. The cliff faces glowed orange and red in the sunset light, beautiful and terrible. I thought about closing the mountain to technical climbing, about finding some excuse: rockfall danger, unstable conditions, anything to keep people away. But I knew it wouldn't work. There were other ways up, other routes, and even if I closed Grandfather Mountain, there were hundreds of other peaks in the Pisgah National Forest. Thousands of climbers every year, all of them looking for challenge and adventure. All of them seeing the mountains as playgrounds, not sacred spaces. All of them potential victims. That night, I sat at the ranger station and wrote a report that I knew no one would believe. I documented everything: the shadows, the aging, the impossible placements of bodies. I included James Swimmer's testimony, the Cherokee legends, my own eyewitness account. I sent it up the chain of command and waited. The response came 2 days later. My supervisor called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable. "Jonathan," he said carefully, "I think maybe you need some time off. Altitude exposure can cause hallucinations, and the stress of losing Derek." "I'm not crazy," I said. "I'm not saying you're crazy. I'm saying you're traumatized, which is perfectly reasonable given what happened. But this report..." He tapped the papers on his desk. "Shadow monsters? Vengeful spirits? You have to understand how this sounds. So you're not going to close the mountain?" "Close it? Jonathan, we just approved 5 new climbing permits for next month." I left his office, cleaned out my desk, turned in my badge, but I didn't leave the mountain. That was 43 years ago. I'm 89 now, living in a small cabin at the base of Grandfather Mountain. Never moved away, never stopped watching. The official death count from 1,982 is 4. Michael Torres, Jessica Chen, Raymond Park, and Derek Thompson. All attributed to altitude sickness and equipment failure, but I keep my own count. Over the years, I've documented 17 more deaths on this mountain, all of them showing signs of rapid aging. All of them occurring in spots that make no physical sense. The Park Service stopped sending me reports years ago. They think I'm just a crazy old man obsessed with conspiracy theories. Maybe they're right. But every time another climber goes missing, every time another body is found aged beyond recognition, I add it to my records. The Cherokee Nation has been fighting for years to have Grandfather Mountain designated as sacred land, off limits to commercial climbing. They've gotten nowhere. Too much money in tourism. Too many people who see mountains as obstacles to conquer rather than places to respect. Tanaha is still there. Still watching. Still protecting. I see it sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. I'll look out my window at the mountain, and the shadows will be wrong, too dark, moving independently. I've learned to see them over the years. My eyes changed after that night in 1982. Something about being that close to the Shadow Guardian altered my vision. Now I see shadows the way they really are. Not just absence of light, but presence of something else, something old and patient and angry. My hair turned completely white within a month of Derek's death. My hands shake now, but not from age, from memory. I dream about that night in the meadow, watching Derek age and die while I stood helpless with a flare gun. I dream about Michael Torres staring at the sky with ancient eyes. I dream about shadows that walk. Sometimes young climbers stop by my cabin, looking for route advice or asking about conditions. I tell them all the same thing: pick a different mountain. Most ignore me, some listen. The ones who listen live longer. Last month, the Park Service approved a new Via Ferrata route up the north face, a permanent climbing path with cables and anchors drilled directly into the rock. Construction starts next spring. When I heard about it, I drove up to the tribal council and told James Swimmer's grandson, who now serves as an elder himself. Tanawa will respond, he said quietly. When they start drilling into the rock, when they scar the mountain that deeply, it will respond. How many will die? I asked. As many as it takes. I think about that conversation a lot these days. I think about warning people, about trying harder to make them understand. But who would listen to a crazy old ranger who believes in shadow monsters? No one, that's who. So I sit in my cabin and I watch the mountain. I keep my records, and when the construction crews arrive in spring, I'll be here to document what happens. Maybe this time someone will believe me. Maybe this time someone will finally understand that some places are protected for a reason. Or maybe not. Maybe Tanawa will just keep taking people, one by one, aging them to death and arranging their bodies as warnings that no one heeds. Maybe humans are too stubborn, too arrogant, too convinced of our right to go anywhere and do anything. Maybe we deserve what's coming. I'm writing this down now because I want there to be a record. A real record, not sanitized reports about equipment failure and altitude sickness. When they find my body, and they will find it, probably sooner than later given my age, I want them to find this story too. I want someone to know the truth. Grandfather Mountain is protected. Something ancient lives in its shadows, and it is running out of patience. My name is Jonathan Ironwood. I was a ranger for 19 years. I don't expect you to believe what I've written here, but I'm asking you anyway. Stay off Grandfather Mountain. Choose a different peak. Take your ropes and your pitons and your sense of conquest somewhere else. Because the shadows are watching, and they remember every scar we carve into their stone. The warning is carved in Cherokee, on a boulder, at the mountain's base, hidden by brush where tourists won't find it. I visit it sometimes, running my fingers over the ancient words. James Swimmer translated it for me before he died. Here lives the one who takes time. Here dwells the guardian of what is sacred. Enter at your own risk, for the mountain does not forget, and the shadows do not forgive. Simple words, true words. I just wish someone would listen. Last week, a young couple came by asking about good climbing routes. They were in their 20s, healthy and strong and full of confidence. I told them what I always tell people, pick a different mountain. Why? The woman asked. What's wrong with Grandfather Mountain? I almost told her everything, almost showed her my records, my photographs, my documentation of 43 years of impossible deaths. But I looked at her young face, her eager smile, and I knew she wouldn't believe me. Just a feeling, I said instead. Old man's superstition. They thanked me politely and left. I watched them drive up toward the base camp access road. I didn't follow them. I'm too old for climbing now. Too old for rescue work. All I can do is watch, and wait, and add to my records when they don't come back. Sometimes on clear nights, I sit on my porch and look up at Grandfather Mountain. The moonlight casts shadows across its face, dark patches that look almost like human shapes. Hundreds of them, painted on the stone. All the people Tanawa has taken over the centuries, their shadows burned into the rock like nuclear afterimages. I see my own shadow sometimes among them. Not yet, I'm still alive, but it's there, waiting. A space on the cliff face with my shape in it, patient as stone. Tanawa knows I'm coming. Eventually, we all come to the mountain. Some of us just take longer than others. I'm not afraid anymore. After 43 years of watching, of recording, of trying to warn people who won't listen, I'm tired. When my time comes, when the shadows finally reach for me, I won't fight. I'll go to the mountain one last time. I'll climb as high as these old legs will carry me, and I'll let the guardian take what it's owed. Maybe then someone will believe. Maybe then someone will finally close the mountain. Or maybe they'll just find one more body aged beyond recognition, positioned on some impossible ledge, and write another report about altitude sickness and equipment failure. Either way, the shadows will still be there. Still watching. Still waiting. Still protecting what humans have forgotten how to respect. My name is Jonathan Ironwood, and this is my testimony. Believe it or don't. But if you ever find yourself at the base of Grandfather Mountain with climbing gear and ambition, remember this story. Remember Derek, aged from 28 to 100 in minutes. Remember the shadows that walk. Remember that some places are sacred. And for God's sake, pick a different mountain. My name is Margaret Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger for 18 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything the mountains had to offer. I was wrong. I work in the Jefferson National Forest in Virginia, way up on Mount Rogers where most folks never go. My specialty is snakes, the venomous kind that can kill you if you're not careful. I have a PhD in snake science, which sounds fancy, but really it just means I know how to milk venom from angry serpents without getting bit. For nearly 2 decades, I've handled timber rattlers, copperheads, and cottonmouths. I've been bitten 3 times, twice by accident, once because I got cocky. Each time, I knew exactly what venom was pumping through my veins and exactly how to treat it. I thought I knew every dangerous snake in these mountains. The Cherokee people who lived here first had stories about a giant serpent they called Uktena. They said it was as long as a tree is tall, with a crystal horn on its head and eyes that could see into your soul. I always figured these were just scary stories about big timber rattlers that got exaggerated over time. You know how it is. Catch a 3-foot snake, and by the time you tell the story, it's 6 feet long. June 1985 was the hottest, driest summer I'd ever seen. The drought was so bad that underground caves and springs that had been hidden for decades started showing themselves. Old creek beds turned into dusty paths, and you could walk places that used to be underwater. That's when the hikers started getting sick. The first case came in on a Tuesday morning. A 23-year-old college student from Richmond was brought down the mountain unconscious. He'd been bitten by something, but the bite marks didn't match any snake I knew. The venom was doing things to his body that shouldn't have been possible. His blood work showed compounds that don't exist in any North American snake. The doctors at the hospital called me because they had no idea what antivenom to use. I drove down to see him, expecting to find bite marks from an escaped exotic pet, maybe someone's illegal cobra or viper. Instead, I found puncture wounds that were too big and too far apart. Whatever had bitten him had fangs the size of my thumb. Must be a measurement error, I told myself. Or maybe the swelling made them look bigger. But then 2 more hikers came down with the same symptoms. Same impossible bite marks. Same unknown venom compounds. All of them had been in the same area. The high-elevation balds near the old Cherokee sites. I packed my gear and headed up the mountain. As a snake expert, it was my job to find whatever was doing this and either relocate it or put it down. I figured I'd find some exotic snake that had escaped from a collector, maybe a reticulated python or a gaboon viper. The forest felt wrong the moment I stepped out of my truck. In all my years working these mountains, I'd never seen them so quiet. No bird songs, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. Even the insects seemed to have gone somewhere else. I set up my camp near a spring that still had water, grateful for the shade of the old oak trees. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. I'd brought all my snake-catching equipment, hooks, tubes, bite-proof gloves, and enough antivenom to treat a dozen people. That first night, I didn't see a single snake, not one. In an area that should have been crawling with timber rattlers and copperheads, I found nothing. It was like every serpent in a 50-mile radius had just vanished. The next morning, I found the first real clue. Near the dried-up creek bed, pressed deep into the mud, was a track that made my blood run cold. It was a serpentine trail, the kind left by a snake moving across soft ground. But this trail was as wide as my body and stretched farther than I could see in both directions. I followed it for half a mile before it disappeared into a rocky area where tracks couldn't form. The whole time, a voice in my head kept saying this was impossible. No snake in North America gets that big. No snake anywhere gets that big. But the evidence was right there in the dried mud, and I had 3 sick hikers who needed answers. I called my research partner, Dr. James Whitman, that evening on my radio. James had worked with me for 5 years, and he was one of the few people who wouldn't think I was crazy when I told him what I'd found. The trail is 43 inches wide, I told him, measuring it again to be sure. James, that would mean a snake at least 60 feet long. Static crackled over the radio for a long moment. Equipment malfunction? He finally suggested. That's what I thought. But I've checked everything twice, and there's something else. All the native snakes are gone, completely gone. I should have found dozens by now. I'm coming up, James said. And I'm bringing Rebecca. Rebecca Stone was our graduate student, a 24-year-old who could spot a snake from 100 yards away. If there was something alive and serpentine in these mountains, she'd find it. While I waited for them to arrive, I collected samples from the spring water and the soil around that massive trail. Under my portable microscope, I found things that didn't belong. Scales the size of dinner plates, and a substance that looked like venom but glowed faintly under UV light. The scales had a pattern I'd never seen before. They weren't smooth like a python's or keeled like a viper's. They had an almost crystalline quality, like they were made of glass instead of keratin. James and Rebecca arrived the next afternoon, loaded down with equipment. Rebecca took one look at the trail and went pale. "Dr. Thornfield," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My grandmother was Cherokee. She told me stories about something called Uktena. Those are just legends," I said automatically, but the words felt hollow. James was already setting up our thermal cameras. "Let's focus on what we can measure and document. If there's a large snake up here, we'll find it." That night, something found us first. I was checking our equipment around midnight when every thermal camera went crazy at once. The screens showed a massive heat signature moving through the trees about a quarter-mile away. It was long and sinuous, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. "James, Rebecca," I yelled into the tent. "It's here." We all crowded around the monitor, watching the impossible shape glide between the trees. The heat signature was uniform, not like a python, which would show hot and cold spots based on its recent meals, but like something with its own internal heat source. "Equipment malfunction," James said, but his voice shook. Then the cameras started shutting down one by one, as if something was systematically destroying them. Rebecca grabbed my arm. "It knows we're watching." The forest went even quieter than before. If there had been any small sounds before, a distant owl, the whisper of wind in the leaves, they stopped completely. It felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath. We sat in our tent with flashlights and snake hooks, 3 trained scientists reduced to scared children. Every few minutes, we heard something massive moving through the underbrush, circling our camp. Whatever it was taking its time, studying us. Around 3 in the morning, it stopped. The normal forest sounds gradually returned. Insects, a few brave birds, the rustle of small animals. We emerged from our tent to find our thermal cameras smashed and our equipment scattered. But that wasn't the worst part. Wrapped around the trunk of the oak tree above our camp was a piece of shed skin. I'd seen thousands of snake sheds in my career, but this one was different. It was translucent and tough, like rubber, and it shimmered with the same crystalline quality as the scales I'd found earlier. I measured it 3 times to be sure. 47 feet long. "This is impossible," James kept saying as we carefully collected the skin. "No snake gets this big, not anywhere in the world." Rebecca was quiet, staring up at the tree where the skin had been wrapped. "My grandmother said Uktena was the last of the great serpent spirits. She said it guarded the sacred places and would defend them from anyone who threatened the mountain." "Rebecca," I said gently, "we need to focus on biology here, not folklore." But even as I said it, I was thinking about the Cherokee petroglyphs I'd seen in other parts of the forest. Ancient drawings of serpents with horns and glowing eyes. Drawings I'd always assumed were artistic interpretations of normal snakes. Maybe I'd been wrong about a lot of things. The skin was unlike anything in my textbooks. When I tested it that morning, it showed traces of venom compounds that didn't match any known species. Some of the substances weren't even supposed to exist in nature. "We need to call for backup," I told James. "Whatever this is, it's beyond our equipment." But James was staring at something in the trees. "Margaret," he said slowly, "look at the leaves." Every tree within a 50-foot radius of where the skin had been was dying. The leaves were turning black and falling off, even though it was the middle of summer. The bark was developing dark stains that looked like acid burns. Something was poisoning the forest itself. We called for additional equipment that morning, but help was 3 days away. The nearest road was 40 miles through rough terrain, and we were on our own until the helicopter could reach us. "We should hike out," James said, looking at the dead trees around our camp. "Whatever this thing is, it's getting bolder." But I couldn't leave. 3 people were in the hospital because of this creature, and more hikers came through this area every week. If I didn't figure out what we were dealing with, someone was going to die. Rebecca volunteered to hike back to the trailhead and radio for immediate evacuation support. She was the youngest and fastest hiker among us, and she could reach the communication station in 6 hours. "Be careful," I told her as she packed her gear. "Stay on the main trail and make noise. Most snakes will avoid you if they hear you coming." "This isn't most snakes," she said quietly. She left at sunrise, and James and I spent the day documenting everything we could find. The massive trail led deeper into the forest, toward an area the Cherokee had marked as sacred. We followed it carefully, taking photographs and measurements. The farther we went, the more wrong everything felt. Plants were wilting without any obvious cause. Small animals had fled the area entirely. Even the water in the creek beds was starting to smell strange, metallic and bitter. "It's like the whole ecosystem is shutting down," James said, testing the water with our chemical kit. "pH is way off. There are compounds in here that shouldn't exist." That's when we found the cave. Hidden behind a curtain of dying vegetation was an opening in the rock face that I'd never seen before. The drought had lowered the water table enough to expose it. Ancient Cherokee symbols were carved around the entrance, and the air coming from inside smelled like metal and old death. "We should wait for backup," James said. But I was already putting on my headlamp. As the lead scientist on this investigation, I had to know what we were dealing with. 3 people were counting on me to find answers. The cave stretched back into the mountain farther than our lights could reach. The walls were covered with more Cherokee petroglyphs, elaborate drawings of serpents with horns and rays of light coming from their eyes. In the center of many drawings was a symbol I'd seen before, a crystal or jewel embedded in the serpent's forehead. "Margaret," James called from behind me. "You need to see this." He was standing over something that made my stomach drop. It was Rebecca's backpack, torn open and scattered across the cave floor. Her water bottles were crushed, her radio was smashed, and there were dark stains on the rocks that I really didn't want to identify. But Rebecca was nowhere to be seen. "She's only been gone 8 hours, I said, checking my watch. "She couldn't have made it this far and back." James was examining the torn backpack with his flashlight. "Look at these tears. They're not from falling on rocks or getting caught on branches. Something ripped this apart, something with claws." A low sound echoed from deeper in the cave, a rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't quite a hiss and wasn't quite a growl. It was the sound a mountain would make if it were alive and angry. "We need to leave," James whispered. "Right now." But as we turned to go, something blocked the cave entrance. At first, I thought it was a tree that had fallen. Then the tree moved. It was a head. A snake's head the size of a car, covered in scales that seemed to generate their own light. 2 massive eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, stared at us with an intelligence that no animal should possess. And there, in the center of its forehead, was a horn made of what looked like living crystal. It pulsed with its own inner light, and when that light touched us, my mind filled with images that weren't my own. I saw the forest as it had been centuries ago, green and alive, protected by something ancient and powerful. I saw Cherokee warriors making offerings to the Great Serpent, showing proper respect for the guardian of the sacred places. I saw white settlers arriving, cutting down trees, mining and hunting without permission or gratitude. And I saw the serpent's rage growing with each desecration of the mountain. The images stopped, and I found myself on the cave floor with no memory of falling. James was beside me, blood running from his nose, his eyes wide with terror. The great head was still there, watching us, waiting. In the crystal horn's light, I could see deeper into the cave. There, arranged in a circle around a pool of water, were dozens of human skeletons. Some looked ancient, Cherokee remains placed with ceremony and respect. Others were newer, wearing the remains of modern clothing. And there was Rebecca. She was sitting peacefully by the water, her back against the cave wall. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. But somehow, impossibly, she looked completely at peace. The serpent's voice filled my mind without using my ears. She disturbed the sacred boundary. She took without permission. Now she rests with the mountain forever. I tried to speak, to explain that we meant no harm, but my voice wouldn't work. The creature's presence was overwhelming, like trying to have a conversation with a hurricane. James grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the cave entrance. The great head watched us go but didn't follow. We stumbled out into the dying forest and ran. We made it back to our camp as the sun was setting. James collapsed beside our tent, shaking and mumbling about eyes that could see through time. I checked him for injuries, but the only damage seemed to be psychological. "It spoke to me," he kept saying. "Not with words, with pictures." It showed me things, Margaret. Things about my family. What kind of things? My grandmother. She used to tell me stories about Uktena, but I never listened. I thought they were just made-up tales to scare children. He looked up at me with haunted eyes. She wasn't Cherokee by blood, but she married into the tribe. She knew the real stories. I got our satellite phone and tried calling for emergency evacuation, but something was interfering with the signal. Every time I got through to the ranger station, the call would cut out after a few seconds. "We're going to have to hike out ourselves," I said, "in the morning." But James was studying the Cherokee petroglyphs we'd photographed in the cave. "Look at these symbols around the serpent drawings. They're not just decorative, they're instructions." Instructions for what? How to approach Uktena safely, how to show proper respect. He traced the symbols with his finger. My grandmother told me that Uktena wasn't evil, it was a guardian. But if you treated the mountain like it belonged to you instead of showing proper respect, it would defend itself. I thought about the hikers who'd been bitten. All of them had been camping in areas marked with old Cherokee boundary stones. All of them had been hunting or collecting specimens without permits. "So what do we do?" I asked. James was quiet for a long time. "We go back. We follow the protocol from the petroglyphs, and we ask permission to take Rebecca home." "That's insane. Is it crazier than a 60-foot snake that can put pictures in your head?" He had a point. We spent the night preparing offerings based on what we could interpret from the ancient drawings. Tobacco from James's emergency kit, water from the cleanest spring we could find, a piece of obsidian I'd been carrying as a good luck charm for years. At dawn, we returned to the cave. The serpent was waiting for us outside the entrance, coiled in a massive spiral that took up most of the clearing. In daylight, I could see details that had been hidden in the cave. Its scales weren't just reflective, they actually glowed with soft, shifting colors like an oil slick. The crystal horn was larger than I'd thought, easily the size of a baseball bat, and it pulsed with a heartbeat rhythm. But the most unsettling thing was its intelligence. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This was something that understood exactly what we were and why we'd come back. James stepped forward slowly, holding the offerings. He spoke in a mixture of English and, what I assumed, was Cherokee, though I had no idea he knew any native languages. "We ask permission to speak with the guardian of this sacred place. We bring offerings of respect and understanding. We seek the return of our companion who unknowingly violated the ancient boundaries." The serpent's head lowered until it was level with ours. Those massive eyes fixed on James, and I saw him stiffen as the telepathic contact began. Images flashed between them. I could see the reflected light from the crystal horn playing across James's face. After several minutes, James stepped back. His nose was bleeding again, but he was smiling. "It will allow us to retrieve Rebecca's body," he said. "But there are conditions." "What conditions?" Before he could answer, the serpent's attention turned to me. The crystal horn flared brighter, and suddenly I was experiencing the creature's memories directly. I saw the mountain as it had been for thousands of years, a living entity with the serpent as its protector. I felt its rage at the destruction of the forests, the pollution of the streams, the disrespect shown to the sacred sites. But I also felt its sadness. It was alone, the last of its kind, carrying the weight of protecting a mountain that fewer and fewer people understood or respected. And then I understood what it wanted. The serpent wasn't just defending territory, it was trying to preserve something that was dying, the old relationship between humans and the natural world. The Cherokee had known how to live with the mountain's guardian. They'd brought offerings, asked permission, shown proper respect. Modern people like me just took what they wanted. "You will speak for the mountain," the serpent's voice said in my mind. "You will teach others the old ways. You will ensure the sacred places are protected." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The creature's head pulled back, and the telepathic connection ended. I found myself crying, though I couldn't say exactly why. "We can take Rebecca," James said quietly. "But we have to promise that her death will mean something, that we'll use what we've learned to protect this place." We brought Rebecca's body out of the cave that afternoon. She looked like she was sleeping, peaceful and unharmed, except for 2 small puncture wounds on her neck. The serpent's venom had preserved her perfectly, and there was no sign of decomposition. The creature watched us carry her away but didn't interfere. As we reached the edge of the sacred area, I felt a final message in my mind. Remember your promise. The helicopter evacuation team found us the next day. We told them Rebecca had died in a climbing accident, and the official report listed her death as accidental. The truth wouldn't have been believed, and it wouldn't have helped anyone. The 3 hikers in the hospital recovered completely once we'd made our agreement with Uktena. Their venom levels returned to normal overnight, as if they'd never been bitten at all. The doctors called it a medical miracle. My blood samples and photographs of the giant shed skin were classified by the government within a week. Official reports listed them as equipment malfunction and misidentified materials. The venom compounds I'd isolated vanished from the lab, and my research was transferred to a department I'd never heard of. But the real changes were inside me. I dream now, vivid dreams, where I see the mountain through Uktena's eyes. I understand which areas are sacred and which are safe for human visitors. I can feel when the forest is healthy and when something is threatening the ancient balance. James resigned from the university and now works with the Cherokee Nation, helping to identify and protect sacred sites. His grandmother's stories, which he dismissed for 30 years, became the foundation for a new approach to forest management. I stayed with the Park Service, but my job changed. Instead of just studying snakes, I became an advocate for traditional ecological knowledge. I work with tribal elders to understand the old ways of respecting the forest. I guide researchers who want to study the mountain, making sure they understand what they're entering. The area around Uktena's cave is now officially protected as critical habitat for an undiscovered species. Permits for research or recreation in that zone are nearly impossible to get. Most people assume it's bureaucratic red tape, but a few of us know better. Sometimes, on very quiet nights when the moon is dark, I hear movement in the forest that's too large to be any normal animal. The thermal readings from our remote cameras occasionally show impossible heat signatures moving through the protected areas. But these incidents are always classified, and the data disappears into government files. The mountain is still being guarded. 3 years later, I met with a Cherokee elder named Mary Crow Feather, who had known James's grandmother. She smiled when I told her my story. Uktena chooses its own protectors, she said. Your friend's grandmother was chosen too, 60 years ago. She spent her life teaching people to respect the old boundaries, though most wouldn't listen. How many of these guardians are there? I asked. Mary's smile faded. Fewer each year. The old spirits are dying as their sacred places are destroyed. But some remain, waiting for humans to remember how to live with respect instead of dominance. I asked her what would happen if all the guardians disappeared. Then the mountains will die, she said simply. And so will we. I think about that conversation every day as I walk the forest boundaries. I carry tobacco and clean water in my pack, not as equipment but as offerings. I speak to the mountain before I take so much as a photograph. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the forest, I feel eyes watching me from the shadows. Not hostile eyes, but ancient ones that remember what the world was like before we forgot how to ask permission. Rebecca's death taught us that some places have their own laws, older than any human government. Some protectors have been waiting longer than our civilization has existed. The question isn't whether these guardians are real. The question is whether we can learn to respect them before it's too late. My name is Margaret Thornfield, and I am the voice of the mountain. This is my story, but it's not mine alone. There are others like me now. In forests and deserts and rivers across the land, all of us learning to remember what we should never have forgotten. The mother of serpents is still here, still watching, still protecting the sacred places. She's waiting to see if we can remember how to be worthy of her guardianship.